Good morning, everybody. We're ready to start. I'm not sure why I got louder when I said it's ready to start.
I got excited.
All right. We're ready to start. We have to just tone it down a little bit. It sounds like an all-day disco over there. My name is Councillor James Pasternak. I'm the chair of the General Government Committee. The clerk has confirmed that we have quorum, and I'd like to now call meeting 4 to order. Today's meeting is being held with members of council and city staff participating both by video conference and in person at City Hall in Committee Room 2. City Hall is open to the public, and anyone is welcome to attend the meeting in Committee Room 2 at City Hall today. The public may continue to participate electronically via video conference and can watch this meeting live at youtube.com/Toronto City Council Live. The clerk staff have connected registered speakers to the meeting by video conference, and the list of speakers can be viewed online by visiting the General Government Committee's page at toronto.ca/council and clicking the speakers box for today's meeting. I ask for everyone's patience if we experience any delays or technical problems during the meeting. City Clerk has provided all agenda materials on toronto.ca/council and on CMP, the Clerk's meeting portal. Clerk's IT staff will be available for members and committee in this committee room and remotely. If you need help with your devices, members, when voting on an item or motion, I ask that you keep your video on and raise your hand to indicate your vote. Members, I want to remind you that must still submit and approve your motions by email, and staff are available at ggc@toronto.ca to help with motions. Although we are in different locations and meeting remotely today, the committee would like to acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississauga of the Credit. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? If you do have an interest, please raise your hand and unmute your mic. I do not see any. And I don't, originally we thought there was a new item being added to the agenda. That is not the case. That is advanced circulation of a motion, which we will get to shortly. So why don't we do a run through of the agenda? Great, okay. GG 4.1, 2022 write-off of uncollectible property taxes and accounts receivable. Anyone looking to hold the item? Councillor Holiday, would you like to move the item?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Item is moved. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Item GG 4.2, Administrative Tribunal, Penalty Tribunal Chair's 2022 Annual Report. Anyone like to hold the item? No? Councillor Bravo, would you like to move the item?
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Bravo. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Item number 4.3, Administrative Penalty System 2022 Activity. Anyone like to hold the item? No? Councillor Matlow, would you like to move 4.3? Moved by Councillor Matlow. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 4.4, Annual Report 2022 Parking Enforcement Unit, Parking Violation Notices Issuance. Would anyone like to hold the item? No? Councillor Perks, would you like to move it? Moved by Councillor Perks. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 4.5, Amendment to Blanket Contract with Ford Motor Company of Canada Limited, Amendment to Purchase Order, and FCA Inc. for General Vehicle Acquisitions and Upfitting. Anyone like to hold the item? I will move it then. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 4.6, contract with FST Canada operating as Joe Johnson Equipment for supply and delivery of latest model Mack LR cab over truck chassis with automated loading refuge packer body.
This isn't how you saw your life going.
I'm working my way down the corporate ladder. Anyone like to hold the item or drive away with the item? No. Yeah, Vice Chair will move the item. Councillor Holiday, all those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Item 4.7, a contract with Lima's Gardens and Construction, Inc. for winter maintenance services at various fire stations and training locations for Toronto Fire Services. Councillor Bravo, it's all yours. Moved by Councillor Bravo. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Number 8, contract with Uniform Group, Inc. for the provision of uniform clothing to Toronto Paramedic Services.
Hold, please.
Held by Councillor Perks. Item number 9, amendment to purchase order with Deltera Contracting, Inc., Bayside 2, for the construction of the East Bayfront Community Recreation Center for Parks, Forestry, and Recreation. Ward 10. I know there's many who would like it in their ward. Does anyone want to hold it? No? You're good? Okay. Okay, moved by Councillor Bravo. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Item number 10, contract with Anronn Electric Motor Repair for electric pump and motor services at city facilities. Why don't we get Councillor Cheng to help out here. Moved by Councillor Cheng. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Amendment to contract with Wilcox Door Service for maintenance and repair of overhead doors. Anyone like to hold the item? I will move it. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Number 12, amendment to purchase order for professional engineering services for replacement of the pumping system and other existing equipment for the Western Beaches Tunnel. Anyone like to hold that item? A private conversation, okay. Okay, so Councillor Cheng, did you want to move item 12?
Happy to do so.
Okay, moved by Councillor Cheng. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Number 13, negotiated request for proposals for the provision of administrative and underwriting services for employee benefit programs. Moved by Mr. Vice Chair Holiday. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Number 14, contract with Kodiak Group Holdings, operating as work authority for various safety footwear. I'll be happy to move the item. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Number 15, award of Ariba document for Green Infrastructure Partners Incorporated for construction services for the basement flooding protection program study area. I guess I would have to support this. It's in my ward. I will move the staff recommendations. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Award of request for tender to Grascan Construction Limited for Port Union Road widening from Island Road to Lawrence Avenue East. Anyone like to hold the item? Okay. Mr. Vice Chair, would you like to move it?
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Holiday. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Number 17, contract for professional engineering service to RV Anderson Associates Limited for Lawrence Park Neighborhood Road reconstruction and basement flooding improvements, Ward 15. Anyone like to hold the item? Councillor Matlow, would you like to move it? Moved by Councillor Matlow. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Award of contract to Viola Management Incorporated for the 2023 Local Roads Resurfacing Program for Engineering Construction Services, numerous awards. Anyone like to hold the item? Councillor Perks, would you like to move it? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Item number 19 is held for speakers. Item number 20, supply, award of RFP to Sysco, Toronto for supply and delivery of groceries for long-term care, homes, shelters, and childcare centers. Anyone like to hold the item? Hold or move? Moved by Councillor Matlow. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Item 21 is being held by Councillor Cheng. Is that correct? And item 22 is held for speakers. Item 23 is approval to expropriate a part of 165 the Queensway for road safety enhancements, Ward 3. Anyone like to hold that item? Moved by Councillor Perks. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 24, expropriation of permanent and temporary easements in the properties known as numerous addresses on Halford Avenue, Stage 2. It's Ward 4.
Hold, please.
Held by Councillor Perks. 25, nominal lease agreement with Food Share Toronto for non-exclusive use of Dragon Community Community Gardens at 9 Bonnard Place, Ward 9. Councillor Bravo is moving it. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Item 26, Councillor Cheng, you've held item 26? That is correct, okay. And 27 is a revised report from the Deputy City Manager Corporate Services, held by Councillor Bravo. 28, Fleet Services Report of the City of Toronto's fleet availability and utilization rates. Anyone like to hold the item?
I'd simply like to say that I continue to be impressed by the work of Fleet Services on making the transition to greener vehicles, including using bicycles to get certain city services done. Well done.
Great, okay, thank you very much. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Last two items, item number 29 is held, well, we have a speaker on the item, also a request from Councillor Cheng to hold the item, and item 30 is being held by Councillor Cheng. Now, there was a request.
Actually, I don't need, sorry, Councillor Pasternak. I actually don't need to hold it. I just really wanted to, give my accolades to the team that put this report together, the work that's been done. And I think everyone should have a look at the number of devices that have been inspected. It went from 97,000 in 2021 to 300 and almost 360,000 in 2022. So a lot of amazing work has happened here, and everyone should really celebrate and give their compliments to this team. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much.
I'm happy to move it. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Cheng. Item 30, update on fire and life safety compliance. City of Toronto is being released by Councillor Cheng. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Now, there was a request from Councillor Matlow to deal with item 19 first. I think, was that, am I understanding that correctly?
I'd be grateful.
Yeah. So that's the crossing guard item. We do have speakers on the item. I don't know whether they're in the room or remote. But if it's the will of the committee, we will deal with item number 19 first.
They're not online, so they must be in the Barbara, is it Barbara?
Myra Chico? Is Myra Chico in the room? They probably didn't expect it to come so.
Well, it's not a timed item. You can, if they did show up later.
Well, then again, we've moved 90% of the agenda already.
And I mean, to be fair, it's not a timed item.
No. Myra Chico? No. David Petton? David Petton? Okay, committee members are the two speakers listed are not available either in person or online, so we can go right to the item. If they,
Mr. Chair, I had talked to a couple of people who intended to depute, and I'm wondering if they looked at it, saw they were 19th on the agenda or 8th on the agenda and weren't here right at time. So maybe if we do questions and so on of staff, we could check again at the end of that to see if they've arrived.
Do you have a way to contact?
we could, well, we have a couple of options. We could proceed with questions for staff and speakers and then wait for the, see if the deputants arrive. The other option is an item that you're holding, which is 4.8, the uniform group for provision of uniform clothing, Toronto Paramedic Services. Technically, that would be the first item on the agenda.
Why don't we go there, if that's okay with Councillor Matlow?
So why don't we do number 8? Let's hope our deputants arrive, and then we'll go to 19, if that's the will of committee. All right, so Councillor Perks, question for staff?
Okay, this is the uniform purchasing. My questions don't have to do with the current tender, but there's a comment in the last paragraph of the comment section. It says that the intention is to do work during the life of this contract to look at other options. Could you expand on that a bit?
Sure. Through the chair, prior to the expiration of the contract, we're going to be looking at other ways of delivering the service or providing uniforms to our staff. One of which is mentioned in the report is a managed contract where a third-party vendor actually looks after things like the storage, distribution, ordering, all of the facets of uniform distribution for our staff. But at the same time, we'll go through the necessary steps to prepare an RFP if that sort of avenue doesn't work.
So in developing that work, you've got, you've mentioned two options. One is a managed contract. Another is to, develop an RFP. We've actually had correspondence at this committee about some of the problems with larger managed contracts. I'm wondering, in developing that, will you also do a business case comparison of the Toronto Public Service somehow bringing together the police, fire, ambulance to deliver it ourselves? And that way we would have a baseline case to judge other options against. Would that be something you would consider doing?
We'd certainly consider doing that for sure. Yeah, it's not something that we've done, I believe, but it's...
Yeah, there might be a couple of members of the committee, I know Councillor Bravo's interested in this, who might want to sit down as you're thinking your way through that together with purchasing staff and just make sure that we've got a good test case of direct delivery to compare the other options to.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Happy to engage in that for sure.
Okay, good. Those are my questions. I can move the report.
Well, let's see if anyone has any other questions for staff. Councillor Holiday?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is for uniforms. Who else uses uniforms that would be similar to what's underneath this contract besides paramedics?
Through the chair, with paramedic services, you mean, Councillor?
No, just generally in the city.
Well, those that I know of, obviously police and fire, I'm sure there are a number of divisions. I don't know them off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
Would other jurisdictions be in the same boat as Toronto? They'd be looking for uniforms? It's kind of like a commodity, right?
Sorry, there's a bit of background noise there. I didn't hear that, Councillor.
Well, what I'm getting at in my questions, is there an economy of scale? Are there other organizations beyond even the city of Toronto that would be buying uniforms? Because they're commodity-like, are they not?
Through the chair, Councillor, we have been speaking with TTC, who's looking at managed services contracts similar to what we are thinking about as an option. And we also know that the federal government, City of Ottawa, and some other large, Canada Post, also use a managed services contract. But we're still in the early stages of exploring that.
So when we do procurements, we think about the business case and the delivery model in a broad perspective. Is there an economy of scale that goes even beyond the City of Toronto? I know that we've had agreements between the province and the city and the province and many municipalities on different types of services. Could this be one of them?
Perhaps the Chief Purchasing Officer can speak to that, Councillor?
Yeah, through the chair, yes, absolutely. There is an economy of scale that can be obtained through this. And actually, that's part of what we would look at going out for the next tender as part of our strategic sourcing branch, is looking at, again, other divisions that have it, as well as possibility of any collaboration with other entities that could participate. Uniforms the materials are the same. It is the branding that would be different. But there's definitely some possibilities. We can actually look at cooperative purchasing as well to see if there's any opportunities there.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Holiday. Any other questions for staff? Speakers? I believe, Councillor Perks, you wanted to move the staff recommendations and speak?
Yeah, no, I think the tenor of my thinking is clear from my questions, so I'll just move the report.
Okay, this
Look
report's
forward to
being
those
moved. Is there
conversations.
anyone else who wants to speak on the item, or we're good to move it? Okay, the report's been moved. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Do we want to try for number 19 again? Is Myra Chico either in the room or...
Where's Myra?
Oh, there we go. Great. Thank you very much for coming. You have 5 minutes.
Honorable councilors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to all of you. My name is Myra Chico. I am the acting president of QP Local 5519 and representing crossing guards at ASP. We have about 300 plus members who are currently providing guard services outside the downtown area of Toronto. I am also a crossing guard myself, which my location is at 26 Underhill, and have been helping keep Toronto's children, youth, and residents safe for the past 4 years. With me today is my colleague, Robert McCabe, who is also a crossing guard at Rathbone and Wind. We are deeply concerned about public safety and with the City of Toronto's apparent lack of concern for residents and crossing guards alike. The reality in Toronto is not the same as in other cities. We face challenges that are far more pronounced than in other Canadian cities, and these affect crossing guards directly. Toronto needs trained and experienced guards, and they need trained and experienced management. Our housing crisis, our addiction crisis, and the rising levels of congestion and anger among motorists make our intersections more unsafe than in other cities. They also mean that crossing guards are dealing with more complex situations than they do in most other municipalities. Every day, we put our lives on the line due to uncertainties faced, particularly on the question if drivers will heed our signals or just ignore us altogether and run us over. That is the dilemma we face every day. We are like playing tags with speeding drivers while we risk ourselves protecting the most vulnerable of the community. Likewise, crossing guards in Toronto are different. The environment is very much different. People think of crossing guards as kindly retirees who earn a little extra cash and help kids safely cross the street on their way to and from school. And yes, that is true for some crossing guards in some locations. But many more crossing guards here are living off their income as crossing guards. We are single mothers, new Canadians, parents, and students trying to survive in this increasingly unaffordable city. We need stable employment. While the addition of clause promising priority hiring is a positive change, it does not guarantee us jobs. It leaves us with a lot of stress and anxiety. We also are acutely aware that the city has only ended the contract for our employer, the one employer where workers organized and formed a union in order to better address safety issues. The one place where the people actually keeping kids safe have any input into training, procedures, and health and safety. The City of Toronto needs to recognize the realities on its street and our right as workers. It is not enough to tell us that we can reapply for our jobs before the general public. We need more stability than that. And it is truly alarming that the city has clearly decided that workers should lose their own union, lose their rights, and lose their voice in the workplace. So, if you will heed our call, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your deputation. Questions for the deputant, Councillor Perks?
Thank you. Thank you, Myra, so much for both what you do and for coming here today. You're probably taking a day off work to be here, eh? Yeah. You mentioned in your deputation that because you have collective bargaining rights, you participate directly in health and safety, in working conditions. Could you tell me a little bit more about how your union local helps with that?
The union sits in the Health and Safety Committee, wherein we determine the magnitude of safety, whatever is the safety conditions that we will be encountering. We will have to balance it, and then we will have to address if there's a safety concern in our area of responsibility.
So you have a formal and legally recognized right to tell management, these are the real conditions out there. These are the ways that our workers could be made safer, and they're required by law to talk about that with you and to make changes.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perks. Councillor Bravo.
Thank you very much for coming in today. So picking up on this question about your voice, before you unionized, how were you able to make your concerns known in a formal way? Like, how would you identify safety risks or the conditions that workers were facing?
Well, before we were unionized, we were on our own. So it's survival of the fittest, really, like, especially in the streets of Toronto. So if you are smart enough to to determine that your safety is on the line, you will know how to deal with it. That's how we are. There's no safety committee. So now that there is a health and safety committee, then there is already like a body that oversees the exact the exact problem.
So prior to the, so outside of being in a union, there's nothing about the way that these contracts are administered from your perspective, or the way that they're directed from your perspective, that would allow you in a formal way to be heard in relation to the work conditions that you're facing?
There were times, there were instances wherein we voice out our concern about our safety to the management, right? But it is not formally forwarded, because it's not, there is nothing that, it's not embodied in any way.
Right, it's not embedded in the way, in the relationship with the company, but it's also not in any way embedded in the relationship between the company and the City of Toronto. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I
Thank you,
have
Councillor.
Great.
Thank you, Councillor Bravo. Councillor Matlow, and then Councillor Cheng.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you for your wonderful deputation and for being here. So I've got a couple of questions for you. First of all, if the new contracts are awarded, and I'll be asking staff to confirm this, but if your members will have the right to return to their jobs under the new contract, would you seek to continue having everyone unionized and working together in your local to protect their health and safety? Would you continue seeking that path?
We will, because health and safety is our foremost concern. Because we work, yes, we need the wages, yes, but first and foremost, if we're hurt, how can we work and how can we have wages, right? So health and safety is the first and foremost in our goal.
And regardless of what company your members might be working for, whether it be ASP or any of the other new companies under any new contract, would it be preferable to you and your fellow crossing guards to have more of a direct relationship with the City of Toronto rather than going through a private company, to be able to not only stand up for your members, but have a direct relationship, so so we can discuss the terms of everything from your wages to any other kind of protections that you need to do your job safely?
That is what we have been hoping for. The City of Toronto take us directly, not outsource the.
Not have a middle person in the middle.
Not outsource the contract, because we are made pawns for every contract renewal. We are made pawns. Like right now, my 380 plus members, they are anxious, and we have a chat group. They are very anxious, like, Myra, what will happen to us? How are we gonna work? Do we have work September? Because we are all in a limbo. We are all in the mercy of contracts, right? So I think the City of Toronto has a right and a duty to take care of us too, because we take care of the most vulnerable in the community.
Well said.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Matlow. Councillor Cheng?
Thank you. I too echo my colleagues. I'm thanking you for your deputation. And I wanted to ask you, what are the working conditions like? I think between summer and winter, you guys, put up with a lot of difficult context to work in.
During winter time, we still work. We are like the postman, but very different as well, because postmen have their vans and their transportation. We only have our post and our the crossing guard button to touch, and we are outside. We are there for an hour and a half, helping people to cross in rain, sleet, snow, sun, whatever is the weather and whatever is the condition. Road conditions also taken because especially when there's a snowstorm. If you remember, there was a snowstorm. We were all wet, and we were really like there just to help them, especially seniors and the most vulnerable, the kids that we have to take care of.
And do you have any indication what will happen to your ability to make a living if this change goes forward in terms of your wages?
Pardon, ma'am?
Do you have any indication, has anyone spoken to you about what this might do to impact your ability to make a living if this change moves forward?
Yeah, if there will be changes going forward, it will really make a big impact in our way of living. Because, let's say, for example, you will slash our hours. For others, the 1 hour or two is not very significant, but for us breadwinners, it is very significant. We bring food to our table. We bring roof to our heads, to our family. Our family is dependent on us. So that is a very significant effect on us if you slash our hours.
And is that something that you think might happen if we move forward with this change, that your hours will be cut?
That's our fear, and that gives us anxiety. Yes, that's what we're thinking, but we don't know yet. So.
And how many hours are paid for right now for crossing guards?
For crossing guards, we work 7 and right when we
6 and 7.
6 and 7 hours. We were paid 6 and 7.
Right. And that allows you to not have to do other things, to focus on being there through all this weather. And do you think that because it's stable and pay, that it helps all of your team to show up every day, that there's a consistency and dedication to the job because you know you can make a living from this?
Yes, we are dependent. We are dependent on our jobs, so that is our livelihood.
Okay,
So the
thank you
slash
so
will
much
threaten
for-
our livelihood.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Councillor Cheng. Are there any other questions for the deputants? Yeah, Councillor Holiday.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for speaking us today. In front of us is 4 contracts, 3 contracts, 4 contracts. So the committee has to make a decision. Do you have a recommendation for the committee?
Like a recommendation that,
Yeah, what are you asking of us today? I listened to your presentation, but do you have an ask?
okay. So we're asking for our jobs to have us stay in our post and don't slash our time, and if possible, honor our collective agreement, because we have worked hard for that collective agreement. From a mere small amount, we have already we have gained an increase, and by September we are also expecting an increase. So that will be a big help right now with inflation and all of the costs going up.
So I just wanted to be clear, because we only have the choice to accept the contracts the way that they've been brought to us by the staff, or vote against them and not have contracts, not have crossing guards. So I appreciate the information you've brought us today, but and you're here on behalf of the union, I just wanted to know what the union is asking of the committee. Is it to vote it down? Is it to do something different? I want to be crystal clear on it.
I think the other union member will answer that.
Is there if there's another speaker, I can ask it again if that's okay.
Yeah, there will be another speaker after me.
Okay, all right. And so I want to make sure I'm clear on the takeaways. You expressed concerns, and the concerns were loss of hours.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and I'm going to paraphrase, but I think you indicated a preference that you would rather work for the city on a permanent basis and not work for a contractor. Those are the two things that whether or not it's in the report, that's what you've said to us today. Did I miss anything else?
That's it, because the city will, when we work for the city, it will guarantee us that it will give us peace of mind that we will not be raffled off again to another contractor.
Okay.
Like something for a price that we will be tossed again to another every renewal year. We will be tossed to a contractor and then another contractor.
And the wage that you're paid per hour, is that different through this, or is it all the same?
The wages are different from other companies.
So I don't understand. Would you be getting higher or lower wages if you worked for the city or another company?
Well, if the city adopts the collective agreement, then it will be the fair wage will be determining how much we are supposed to get.
The fair wage,
because
okay.
If the contractor is, it's a different story, right? It depends on their profit. So,
Do they not pay the fair wage amount too? Do they not pay a fair wage rate?
they do. But then I think with the city we deserve more.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Councillor Holliday. Are there any other questions for the deputants? No? Okay, thank you very much for your comments. Is David Petton in the room or online? Thank you for joining us, Mr. Petton. You have 5 minutes.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. As mentioned, my name is David Patton, and I am the chair of the QP Ontario Municipal Employees Coordinating Committee. We represent more than 90,000 municipal workers across this province. I'd like to start by saying that I agree wholeheartedly with everything Myra just said. Toronto needs to recognize that the scope and scale of its challenges are different than they are elsewhere. You can't pretend, as Ottawa seems to, that you're hiring a group of retirees, or even if that were the case, that retirees can live on a few hours work a day at near minimum wages. It is very troubling to see that the city is dismissing the one group of workers who are organized, and they're flipping the contract to organizations with little or no experience with crossing guard services and little or no knowledge of Toronto. I'm not here to defend ASP, but they now have 4 years of experience under their belts. And from what I see, the city is throwing away all that experience and all that knowledge to bring in new contractors with far fewer qualifications. And just to emphasize what a couple of councillors were talking about earlier, or asking about earlier, in terms of raising health and safety concerns, in terms of protecting or better protecting workers, and the people that they're looking after, that only happens in an organized environment like a union structure. And you find that in non-union environments, workers are much more fearful of bringing those concerns forward. And in fact, there's really an inadequate structure that enables them to do that. So that's a very important point that was raised earlier. The other thing I wanted to mention as well is that usually in a non-union environment, it's a low wage structure, and you have much greater recruitment and retention issues than you see in an organized environment that you would have with a union. So the question becomes why? Why would any reasonable person on this committee or the City of Toronto want to place our most precious resource, our children's safety, needlessly at greater risk? Is it to save a few dollars, or is it actually an attempt at union busting? It seems clear that crossing guards are being punished for advocating for themselves and for the children they protect. After all, it's much easier to cut services when there's no organized group around like a union who can safely advocate for those services. Just as troubling is the fact that we are in a city that pretends to believe in a living wage. Yet right now, you don't have any living wage policy. And thousands of workers in contracted out jobs across the city are that much more precarious because of it. And I get it. It's much easier to balance the books on the backs of people living in poverty when you take away their voice. But how shameful is that? Even your fair wage policy suggests that it is meant to, and I quote, enhance the reputation of the city for fair and ethical business dealings. But contract flipping is anything but fair or ethical. Ultimately, what contract flipping does is harm workers and creates an unreliable, and in this case, a less safer service. Further, we know that thousands of other workers are employed by companies and agencies that the city keeps on short-term contracts, in many cases only year to year. And these are usually people who work with the city's most vulnerable residents. If the city truly cared about fair wages, if the city truly cared about working people or public safety, they'd stop this despicable practice and do the right thing. Bring these workers and thousands of others like them back in-house. Give them the job security and stability that they, their families, and city residents deserve. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Any questions for the deputant? Councillor Bravo?
Thank you for your deputation. So if there are people that say, well, why don't you just unionize the other companies, can you clarify that in fact you don't have, and we don't have in Ontario card check certification, that we don't have, if the requisite amount of workers sign cards, that's still not enough to form a union, unlike other provinces like Quebec?
Yeah, I mean, it's not automatic, and the union does have to organize. And I'll tell you that situations like this make people more fearful because we have a group here that is organized and they're about to lose their contract. So why would any other entity want to engage in that process with the fear that they'll lose their jobs, you know, at some point in the process, or that they'll be looked at in a different way that makes them less desirable to provide the service?
In jurisdictions where there's neutrality and the employer just, upon 50% signing, there's automatic certification, are there more workers of this category who are unionized in Canada and other parts?
To be honest with you, that I can't speak to.
But what I'm asking is, the playing field would be leveled if it were easier to have, if there was a mechanism that made it easier for all the companies, for the workers in all the companies to be unionized. That would be...
Without a doubt. Yeah, 100%. Obviously, like I said, there's a lot of barriers that are in place to organizing. We have usually companies will threaten workers or institute some punitive measures that makes it much more difficult to organize. And certainly, yeah, if there are other mechanisms in place that kind of take away those barriers, it would be a much easier effort.
And when you have worker voice around, in a formalized way, around health and safety and other conditions, as has been said, it makes, there's an attention to the people being served plus the workers. Does that lift the standard for the entire sector or industry from your experience?
I believe so, and I think it's not just beneficial to the individual workers in terms of having better working conditions and health and safety standards. It's actually usually, especially in a service industry like we're in a public service, it actually lifts the health and safety of everyone that's involved. So the worker, but also the people that they're serving as well, right? So I think what's good for one is good for the other.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bravo. Councillor Burks?
We've heard some stuff about bringing work in-house, which I think is something we need to consider carefully. Some stuff about neutrality. Another concept that you sometimes find in public sector purchasing is the notion of successor rights. Could you tell me a little bit about how that works?
Yeah, so basically, there can be an opportunity that if you're contracting out a service, that if there's already a collective agreement in place, that there might be some possibility of successor rights. I don't know if in this case that would automatically under, provincial legislation.
We don't have it built in, and we can't just impose it. But the general concept is, there are a group of workers who deliver a service, they're unionized, whoever's purchasing the service, in this case the City of Toronto, puts it out to tender, companies bid, but they bid knowing that the union stays in place and the workforce stays in place.
That's correct.
That's sort of how successor rights work?
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, some of it is legislated, like let's say for caretakers and food services workers, there's some legislation that protects them in that way, but not necessarily for crossing guards.
So a structure like that means that you keep the skilled workforce, you keep the bargaining agent who's got a health and safety committee in place, that you don't have to, you don't have a circumstance where everybody gets fired and you have to rehire again. You get that consistent level of service delivery.
You're right. The knowledge and experience that comes with it, I think, is invaluable.
And it also does, as we say in our poverty reduction strategy, help people in low-income jobs to build stable careers.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perks. Any other questions for the deputant? Councillor Holiday.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, David. I'll ask the same question that I asked a moment ago, and I just wanted to know if you or if you're representing the union, do you have a recommended advice for the committee today?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think what ultimately, and I think we've kind of both spoken to this, is that we would want to see the service, returned in-house. So turn down whatever is on offer here today and work towards returning the service in-house. Barring that, if that's not a possibility, it would be to restore the contract with the ASP because there's a collective agreement that's already in place.
Okay, I just want to be crystal clear on this. So the advice then is to not accept the staff report and either to proceed to create an in-house service or to not contract with one of the vendors and go to ASP. That's the ask?
Yeah, well, the ask is to protect the workers and their wages and benefits. That's what the ask is ultimately, and what we believe gets us there is actually bringing the service in-house with those workers that are already unionized. And like I said, in the alternative or interim, while you're trying to figure that aspect out, to at least maintain the contract with ASP.
You mentioned the term contract flipping. Could you explain that to me?
Well, I'm not well versed on contract flipping, but my understanding of contract flipping is that every so many years, every couple of years, an organization or a company will retender the contracts with the intent of resetting the contract in a sense, or resetting the conditions so that you're always in a low wage mode, low or no benefit mode, and so workers can never get a footing necessarily in terms of being able to increase their wages and benefits and those sorts of things.
Is there an inference that that's happening here, or was it a rhetorical statement?
I think
you said it was despicable.
I think it's a serious concern for sure, because basically we're going to probably see wages go back to the bare minimum, and these workers have already negotiated benefits and sick days, which you're probably not going to see in a new contract if you should award it in the way that it's been presented.
There were concerns raised about reducing the number of hours. Do you share those concerns? Do you think the city should not change the hours?
Do you know, I think that the public expects a well-delivered service. And with that, I don't think that the public considers that you should be cutting corners from that service in order to save a buck. They basically want to make sure that their kids are safe. They want to make sure that those crossing guards are there when their kids need them. And they need them in the morning, they need them at lunch, and they need them at the end of the day. I don't see how that would ever change. And I'm not sure, what kind of case you could make to suggest that we don't need one of those shifts.
So I'm going to ask the question of staff, but I don't think they specified a unionized or a non-unionized workforce in their procurement process. If the city didn't insource it, do you have a recommendation on placing those specifications in the future? Or would you just sort of leave it be?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that for me?
Well, I don't think the city asked for either a unionized or a non-unionized workforce.
Okay.
Do you think the city should start asking for that?
Oh, definitely. I think every worker should have the opportunity to be organized, because like I said, it leads to much better standards, not just for the workers, but for those they provide the service to. So 100%, it should always be unionized.
So it would be a mandatory requirement. Is that what you're saying?
If that's where you want to head with things, then
No,
I would
you.
100% support you on that. Not a problem.
I was asking your position on it.
Yeah. I just find that there are better standards in a unionized work environment than a non-unionized.
Okay, thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
Thank you, Councillor Holiday. Councillor Cheng?
Thank you, through the chair. I'm just wondering, do you know what the difference is right now in terms of the unionized and non-unionized crossing guards in our city?
In terms of their wage and benefit structure, or I'm not...
Yes.
Okay. I don't have the specifics of the collective agreement with the other vendor or with ASP. I'm not sure if Myra could speak to that, but unfortunately, I don't have that in front of me.
Okay. And do you know, I think the difficulty is the financial pressure of our city, as you may know. And that's why we're here trying to probably save the city money, but obviously it's a competing interest with the well-being of our workers. So just wanting to know, in the interim, as we're trying to figure this out, can you just repeat what you think the best bridge at this moment would be? Because if we don't pass the staff recommendation, there will be no plan in place when things start happening in August in preparation for September.
Absolutely. I feel for everyone on this committee in terms of the tough decisions that they have to make every day. I get it. It's not easy. But I just don't believe that it should be at the sacrifice of services to residents, or that it should be at the sacrifice of the well-being of the workers they're the frontline people. They're doing this work every day. They're the ones that are being yelled at by drivers. They're the ones that are trying to keep kids safe in terms of navigating them to their particular school district. So there's always choices. We always have a choice that we can make. And yes, we can go to that easy, lowest common denominator if we choose to, but what does that do for services in Toronto? What does that do for the Toronto resident? What does that do for the mom that's worried about her kid going off to school, wondering if there is going to be a crossing guard there that day because, they're now being paid at such a low rate that we have recruitment and retention issues? I've read some stories where there are residents that are asking for more crossing guard services, not less. And I think this is an important investment in our kids, in our community, to keep them safe. And I would not want any counselor to have to appear on a news story to justify why a kid got injured walking to school one day because the crossing guard either wasn't there or wasn't at the standard that parents have come to be accustomed to. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you. And my last question is, do you know if currently crossing guards make a living wage in Ontario? That definition is, I think, currently calculated at $23.15.
They don't.
They don't.
Not even close.
Okay, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate your answer.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Cheng. We're not a question. Are we done with the deputant? Any other questions for the deputant? I just have a couple here. As you know, these procurement decisions are made by city staff under very strict protocols. Politicians are not involved in those decisions, and we're presented with a report. Now, there's 3 companies to select for crossing guards. What you seem to be saying is that we're putting the public at risk by selecting these companies. Is that your position?
Well, I mean, that's my concern. I can't say proof positive that that's the outcome, but certainly that would be a concern of ours. We have basically vendors that don't necessarily have experience in Toronto, and really, as I mentioned before, and I'll harken back to this notion of recruitment and retention, and the ability to have that institutional knowledge that helps people do their work on a day in and day out basis, that creates real health and safety concerns. So I do feel that that's a concern for sure.
So you've mentioned that you'd like to see it brought in-house again. Are you referring to when police services managed this program?
Well, that's my understanding, is that police services managed this program. It was non-union at the time, I believe. Then it got contracted out, and of course, as you know, then we unionized the crossing guard group. Bringing it back in-house, obviously, we're advocating that it be brought back in a union structure, in a unionized environment.
Yeah, because one of the reasons it moved from police services to transportation was because of as a result of the police transformational task force, because it was not working in-house.
Right.
I mean, I don't know whether you've heard a story about absenteeism, poor wages, lack of morale.
Yeah.
In-house was not working.
So that's in-house in terms of police services, right? And we're talking about now it's under transportation. So I would imagine it would be a different structure, or I would hope. But definitely that's one of those issues that employers have to grapple with in order to make sure that they're offering decent wages, that they're offering decent working conditions to people in order to be able to retain them. And the benefit of that is that you have a workforce that sticks around. You have a workforce that cares. They're not just transient. They're actually there because they're there for the greater public good. But the benefit to them is that they also can survive on the wages and the benefits that they get.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, we'll go to questions for staff. Councillor Perks, Councillor Matlow.
Thank you. So to begin with, we're not in a position to alter who won or anything like that. Our basic choice is we can accept this or tell you to cancel it and retender.
Yeah, through the chair, no, we're not in a position to make any changes at this point.
Right, and if we retender, then we could have a period where nobody's delivering the service.
But that is correct, you know.
The City of Toronto has a poverty reduction strategy, and in that there are 5 elements. One of the elements is to create decent jobs. We've had some conversations. While you did build some of that in, the full suite of things that were in the most recent report on the poverty reduction strategy, there's some specific language where perhaps we could have done better.
Through the chair, I think there's always room for improvement. Although we do feel very confident that, to the best of our abilities, we tried to meet the intent and spirit of the poverty reduction strategy.
Okay. In the tender requirements, is there a piece that requires successful bidders to offer work to the existing workforce?
Through the chair, that is correct, yeah.
Okay. But we don't have a provision in the tender documents for what we've been discussing as successor rights.
That is correct. Yeah.
Okay. There is a discussion that we're probably going to have around shift changes. Could you talk to me a little bit about what's happening with shifts in this contract?
So through the chair, just to be clear, the intent is that anyone who was previously employed for 3 shifts will maintain those 3 shifts, and likewise, anyone who was hired previously for 2 shifts, that would likewise be maintained. For what it's worth, there was a motion by council a few years back directing us to look at the possibility of revisiting the original 704 locations that we adopted from the police to see if those could be reduced to 2 shifts. But we haven't gotten to that yet, and obviously from a Vision Zero perspective, we prefer to sort of focus on, the existing locations we have now and any new locations to make sure that we determine whether or not there's a necessity for 3 shifts versus not.
Okay, thank you. And just quickly, while we're on it, since Vision Zero has been mentioned, safe crossing of kids going to and from school is part of our Vision Zero work.
Through the chair, absolutely.
And having a trained, skilled workforce doing that work benefits the safety of kids and families on their way to work or on their way to school.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Councillor Perks. Councillor Matlow?
It's obvious to everybody here that the QP local representing our crossing guards in the areas of the city that you're recommending new contracts for are fearful that that their wages, their hours, and their ability to advocate for their health and safety is at risk. What steps did you take to work directly with the leadership of the local so that this item wouldn't come to this committee in the state that it's in, where they are still so extremely concerned about the path that you're asking us to take?
Well, through the chair, because the school crossing guard staff are staff within these vendors, they're not city staff. And so, it's for us to be sort of engaging in the local union of a particular company, we don't typically do that. It's just not, proper business practice. The intent is that the crossing guards elect for the union then basically negotiates with respective vendor.
So if this service was in-house, would it give you the more practical ability to have these kind of conversations with the very people who work on our behalf to be able to ensure that if any item impacting crossing guards came to this committee or any other committee, that you'd have a better ability to resolve issues before they came here?
Through the chair, that would be consistent as with any unionized position within the city.
As Councillor Perks asked, and I just want to clarify this because this is deeply important, we're being asked by some not to approve this recommendation. But is it a fact that if we don't, that there could be a period of time that there's no crossing guards at all at those stations?
Yeah, through the chair, that is correct. Yeah.
That's how this is, please.
Oh, sorry, through the chair to Councillor Matlow. I just wanted to point out that in reference to your question about conversations with the union, because the unionization of the guards with the one of the companies happened after the RFP was already out on the street, it also would have not been appropriate for us to have those conversations. I just wanted to clarify that was the case. The unionization of the guards is a relatively recent situation, which is excellent, but that's been one of the issues that has reduced our ability to.
I appreciate that, but you realize aside from just the general, what is appropriate and what is not appropriate, for an item like this to come to committee, while the leaders of the very people who we are speaking about are feeling left in the dark, they're feeling scared, they have no actual assurance that their members are protected, it's not a good way to actually have this conversation about their future, is it?
Through the chair, I would agree with you. I think it's, when we bring programs like this to council with a contracted service, and we do follow the procurement rules, we often have lots of aspects of those contracts built in to assure both strong support for the program that's being delivered as well as value for money for the city. And that's always often and typically we can do both of those things, and I believe that's what we've achieved here. We've been working on these contracts. It takes quite a while to get these RFPs together and pull the contracted practices together. So we've been working on this for quite some time, and it always feels like it's at the very last minute when we're bringing these issues to council. And that's in part because we get back the vendors' responses and do all that work, and then we bring it to council. So we've been trying to get this done early enough so that we have some ability to give you enough time to ask all the questions.
My last question, with respect to Councillor Perks's questions around ensuring, what is the term again? I apologize. Successor rights? Successor rights. Even though it's not legislatively prescribed, could we have not have, and I'm asking this kind of retroactively, not to ask about the terms of the contract now in an open forum, but do we not have the ability to raise that through RFP, through, and on this item or any other item, to ensure that that it is a term that is based on our, even if it's not legislated, it's just an expectation, and it's something that we are going to be, as we scale who we want to work with, that it's going to be a determinant of who we believe is the best suited company to contract while we, and I would say this editorializing, this temporary period while we still contract out.
Yeah, through the chair. So again, just within the existing contract, obviously, as you mentioned, the union was formed in the middle of the procurement, so there wasn't the opportunity. But as far as future contracts goes, if I could defer to legal services, if Corey, maybe speak to that.
Yeah, so what I will say is the successor rights concept is a legislative process, and I'd be in open forum here, a little careful in how I answer this question, but just to say that we'd have to seriously consider whether or not those stipulations would impact and have a negative relationship to the city in terms of it being found as an employer in those contracts. So those are really the risks that we'd have to take very serious consideration of, and that's, I think, the extent I can answer that in public.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Matlow. Councillor Cheng and then Councillor Bravo.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'm wondering, I know it's inappropriate to disclose things that are being bid on and private contracts, but has there been any consideration of the impact on not just the unionized crossing guards, but all the crossing guards across Toronto, especially those who are changing their employer or will have to resubmit for jobs, the impact of an unknown destination? So we're saying to all the crossing guards, hundreds of them, we're going somewhere, you won't know what it is, you won't know what we're giving you, but we're changing. Has that impact ever been considered?
Through the chair, yes. We typically have a communication strategy in terms of the transition between programs. So originally when we transitioned from the police to city and through the city's contractors, we had a full communication that went out to the crossing guards, and we continue this sort of process of communicating throughout. This time round, likewise, to the most that we could communicate, because again, it's going through a procurement, so there's only so much information that we could unfortunately share or not share with the crossing guards. But again, the intent was to have a full communication strategy, and we do have a transition plan as well established that once, assuming council makes a decision to proceed ahead with these vendors, that we would basically work almost in a hand-holding process of making sure that everyone is properly communicated to as to how they would transition from the existing program and vendors to the new.
So, I say this all the time, the journey is just as important as the destination. And I think we did a poor job with the custodial staff. And I feel like in this situation, we have a group of people who are lower income, vulnerable, And now they are living with anxiety because of the unknown future. And part of that is because we are not giving them any guarantee that in our RFP process, there is no guarantee of what the new future is going to look like. And I'm wondering, I think for some people, I think the challenge is that we're paying 7 hours, but obviously as a crossing guard, you can't work 6 to 7 hours. Has there ever been an exploration where there could be shared staffing with schools? Schools have to hire lunchtime monitors, they have to hire recess monitors. Has there ever been an exploration where there could be a blended employment model that would allow these really excellent community members to further contribute their skills and relationships that they have with the children in the community in a meaningful way that would then have some cost sharing and allow them to be gainfully employed on a full-time basis? Has that ever been explored?
Through the chair, that's something that, independent of us, is already sort of happening, even with the previous two vendors, and we kind of anticipate that sort of relationship with the vendors and the schools would sort of continue. And I do want to also emphasize that these vendors, the original two incumbents as well as the new three that we're dealing with, have a lot of other businesses. And in fact, crossing guards, a number of them have actually found career opportunities through these companies as well too, as potential opportunities. There's a lot of other opportunities for the crossing guards, such that there's opportunities for them to basically get paid the full amount. That being said, short answer to your question, I think there's always good to sort of revisit that dialogue with the school boards to see what opportunities exist in that regard.
Right. And I noticed that, and I think we spoke about this, Caraway was in charge of zone 2, and then is now taking over zone 1. And then, I think zone 2 is one of the largest zones. And that's a big transition. A few hundred people suddenly have to join a new organization. I'm not sure why. Has there been a calculation of the cost of transition? Why are we paying, and obviously the company is going to pay if they get the reward of this contract, for time and energy spent rebuilding relationships? I feel like crossing guards is a very relationship-based line of work. And so such a big change will result in a loss of synergy and relationship. And for what? What is the benefit of that?
Yeah, through the chair. So again, there's only so much I can share because of the procurement process as to how, although it is spelled out in the RFP, which is a public document, about how we went through evaluating and how we landed on certain vendors getting certain zones. But recognizing as well, too, that's part of that transition plan, that it's not just the crossing guards that move from one company to another, it's also the supervisor, the management staff, so in large part, such that either the crossing guards would almost remain the same contact with whoever their former supervisor was, or quite frankly, even if they are moving to a new supervisor, it's a supervisor that has a lot of experience in this field as well too, that's sort of providing carriage. And certainly in the case of Caraway, likewise, they've got the 4 years of experience of this and had a stellar record with respect to that. And again, just it's as much as possible trying to minimize the impacts of that transition for the crossing guards.
I'd like to ask for another round.
Sorry. Councillor Chang, you're well over 5 minutes.
That's why I'm not asking any more questions, but I wanted to see if we can go do another round.
Here, Councillor Chang is requesting another round. What's the will of committee? Yeah. Yeah, no, we're going to finish up the first round, and then we'll go to a second round. That sounds like a boxing match. Councillor Holiday, please.
Thanks, Chair. To staff, just getting my notes here from the deputation. In the procurement, did you union bust?
Through the chair, absolutely not. And just further to that, we did have a fairness monitor that was involved throughout the entire procurement process to ensure that that was not the case.
Did you contract flip?
No. Through the chair, no.
When did the existing company unionize?
Through the chair, my understanding is the existing company incumbent, ASP, unionized in the middle of the procurement process. So the procurement started in January, so it was...
Shortly thereafter, they unionized.
Right. So the procurement went out in January, and shortly thereafter, they became unionized.
Okay, so it was is it an nRFP, I think it was? It was out on the street when that actually happened.
Correct. That was a negotiated RFP that was already on the street when that happened.
Did ASP bid?
They did.
And so did a whole bunch of others.
That is correct, yeah.
And ASP didn't win.
That is correct, yeah.
Was it because they were unionized?
Through the chair, no. Again, with the fairness monitor, we made sure that that was not a factor in our evaluation.
Did you specify in any way whether it should be a unionized group or a non-unionized group of labor?
Through the chair, no, that was not specified.
What did you specify with respect to what the wages should be?
Through the chair, we regulate we provide protection for the wages through the fair wages schedule that's provided, and that's a value in dollar amount per hour that basically escalates on an annual basis. And so that was actually put into the procurement documents, and the three respective vendors that we're recommending for award have all agreed that at bare minimum they would be paying them that hourly rate.
Okay, and so that's a base requirement, is that minimum hourly rate. Do we get into any other provisions about how they deal with their staff?
Through the chair, there's a number of measures that were put into the contract specifically to make sure that we're protecting the well-being of the crossing guards. From a health and safety perspective, in terms of additional field training, vicinity of the work location to where they live. There's a number of elements. I could go on and on. Sorry, I don't want to run the clock.
That's fine. The speaker said they were really, the first speaker said they were really worried about hours. And I get it, right? Somebody's working there and they're thinking about their future. What can you tell the committee about the prognosis for the hours for the people that do this job?
Yeah, so through the chair, the way how we structure the contract is basically paying per hour per location. That being said, for the various vendors, they have different policies when it comes to how much time they pay in terms of preparation, how much time to get on site, that kind of thing. So whereas we establish the fair wage schedule, there's nothing stopping or prohibiting the companies from offering to pay more than that.
Okay. And so the companies have different agreements with their worker groups. And I guess the unionized would have a contract then.
Through the chair, absolutely. And in fact, even on the go forward, there's nothing stopping the union from engaging the new employers and establishing what would be essentially a 5-year contract. Because this new contract we're recommending is 2 years committed, and then the additional 3 years are optional years.
Now, the city may need to make changes to the layout of the crossing guards. We would want to have that operational flexibility, right? Is that correct? Like to increase or decrease the number of hours at a location because it's based on the usage.
Through the chair, that's absolutely correct. And I should note some locations are 30 minutes, some range all the way up to 2 hours as it sits.
Would that be consistent with the economical usage of public resources?
Through the chair, again, this would all be tied back to a rigid warrant process that would clearly dictate from a safety perspective that we need them there longer.
But council's expectation of you, staff, is that you are economically managing the resources that we've got. Is but that's the whole emphasis of this, is it not?
Through the chair, that is correct. Especially through a negotiated RFP process, the intent is to get best value for the city.
Okay, and so the total value of this contract is how much?
Hang on a second, I'm going there.
Yep.
164 million comes to mind, is that right?
You good?
Yeah,
Okay.
good, yeah.
So through the chair, for a total, if we're including option years, it would be 167,433.
With a 3% contingency, right?
Correct?
That's all three.
Thank you.
Thank you. Has everyone gone for a first round? You haven't. Okay, Councillor Bravo.
Thank you, Chair. Through you. So going back to the terms of the request for proposal, this is governed by sort of the substance of the terms is governed by directions that come to you from council, correct? Like saving.
Through the chair, that is correct.
Yeah. So what Councillor Holliday was talking about, saving money and getting value for money. Can you So that was what guided how the RFP was put out and administered.
Through the chair, not entirely, sorry, just to clarify on that answer. Through the negotiated RFP process, the intent is best value, but at the same extent, we look at all city directives, including things like the poverty reduction strategy.
Okay, yes, thanks. I heard the general manager of transportation say it was in a positive way, that this, you said it was a good thing that the crossing guards were unionized, and so I take it that staff do not have a position around the unionization of the sector as a given, and I assume then that you don't dispute the value of formal worker input into health and safety in terms of delivering a city service. Is that correct?
Through the chair, absolutely.
Thanks. In relation to successor rights, we heard from legal that should these be enforced, it would create a more proximate relationship with these workers, as I understood what was said, verging on becoming an employer. Is that why is that the danger area there?
Yeah, I think that's a fair way of paraphrasing my response.
Okay, so if not successor rights, then we still have the concern being raised here, which I think we can all hold in our minds, that this is going to have an impact on future attempts by the workers who are working with low wages and with precarious shifts in a sector where there is a lot of, for example, a personal support worker, where there's a lot of personal risks, physical risks, and a big duty of care to the public. So that the challenge is, as was one of the deputants said, that potentially this would have an impact on the agency of workers in the future, to take on a drive. So the question here is making it so difficult to actually form a union in Ontario right now. Has council ever set direction to staff to embed a requirement for union neutrality in a sector like this, in particular with low wages and other conditions? And is that possible?
I don't believe so, and at this point I would actually look to legal for their advice regarding what we can and cannot do. Generally, in public procurement, we do limit the limitations, if you will, of participation. That's per the trade agreements. We can't do that. So that could be also an issue.
So in a going forward, but we can't go back now and say, impose things on the RFP process. That's been understood in terms of questions. But in a go forward basis, the RFP process, or even earlier if there's a request for qualification, that's when we would make statements about what kind of employers would qualify. And how they should relate to their workers, correct?
Correct, yes.
Thank you. And so to legal, I would ask, does the City of Toronto have the power to require, in the request for qualification or RFP process, a requirement that employers that qualify take a position of neutrality in relation to unionization? Neutrality being that if 50% of workers want to join a union, it gets automatically certified?
I don't think I have an answer to that, and I think that's a complicated question about our authority to stipulate that in a contracting process, a process which is fundamentally structured and governed by the Labour Relations Act, and I'd be very cautious to give a on-the-fly answer to that question.
Okay, well, I'll have more questions in the future about whether other jurisdictions are doing this, but appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bravo. I just have a couple of quick questions. When there's an unsuccessful candidate for procurement, is there an appeal process?
Through the chair, there is a pre-award and a post-award bid dispute process. Normally, these are followed following a debrief with the unsuccessful proponents.
Now, for the company at issue here, have they used that process?
We have received notice on a post-award dispute, correct?
So they're going to appeal the process?
Correct. There is a very strict process to be followed, and the process follows that they must identify where in the procurement process we diverged, or that we did not follow our process, or what was identified in the RFP.
So the deputant said, or intimated, that the companies we have selected are non-unionized, and because of that, the public is at greater risk. Would you concur or respond to those comments?
Respectfully, through the chair, I would not be in agreement with those comments. We have followed a very strict process for evaluating the experience, the implementations, and the proponents that have been put forward to ensure and mitigate against any possible risks for that. And it was quite highly evaluated. We also naturally had the fairness monitor to ensure fairness throughout the process, and that means they're embedded from start to finish.
So with the fairness monitor, your report also says that they must conform to the City of Toronto Fair Wage Policy and labor trades requirements. Labor trades requirements, just very quickly?
Go for it.
Yeah, through the chair, yeah. So labor trade requirements, basically anything that the provincial legislation entails in terms of protecting workers, worker health and safety, the environment they work in, all that kind of stuff as well.
So when it came to unionization, is it safe to say, and I don't know whether it's in the public domain, that Caraway actually had a unionization process underway and the guards elected not to go that route?
Through the chair, I don't think we don't really look into the private dealings of the business, so unfortunately we can't comment on that.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. Councillor Cheng has requested a second round, so Councillor Cheng, and then I saw Gord Perks. Right. Councillor Perks. So go ahead.
Thank you. Through the chair, I think what made me struggle about this report is there isn't clarity of the difference between previous and current, I guess, proposed new framework financially. So, you know, what is the difference in a cost per crossing guard per year before, so let's say 2022, and after, let's say 2024, since this would be a transition year? Is there a calculation of what that is?
Yeah, okay.
So there's a limitation to what information we can share at this point because it is confidential information. I believe this.
But you have a financial number. You have 165 million for 5 years with options. So
Okay.
if there must be a calculation of what did we spend in 2022 per crossing guard per year versus what we expect to spend in 2024.
Yeah, through the chair. So if I can break it down in terms of the fair wage schedule. So when we first took the program on in 2019, it was roughly about $15 per hour, whereas now, as a minimum, that was basically published within the contract, and it was a minimum framework that the vendors had to work with. Subsequent to that now, over the years, and the both vendors had to basically follow that strategy and plan. And now the current fair wage is basically dictating $17.32. Plus,
right, but that doesn't tell me how many hours they're going to be paid, and I think that's where the anxiety is coming from, because people are currently actually using this job as a way to raise their families, some of them, or to make a living. So it's not a hobby to be a crossing guard. It's actually a chosen profession for these individuals. So I think that's the gap that I can't see financially the impact that it's going to have on us, on the city budget, and in terms of our expenditures. So, and the other question I have is, you know, in this new proposal, if any of these crossing guard, if any of these groups do unionize, who will then absorb the costs? Because assuming that if they unionize, there would be a cost increase that is not in the current negotiated numbers. Where would that extra money come from?
actually, through the chair, if I can go back to your first question, and then we'll answer that one. Apologies. I did also want to add to the first question, just that when the program was under the police originally, if a crossing guard was assigned for 3 shifts, so 3 one-hour shifts, they would only be compensated just for that 1 hour. Whereas in the moving forward, and likewise, if the program were to become, say, a city program and there was city unionized staff, likewise, there's no opportunity for us to sort of work anything between there, outside of the additional, travel time to work, those sorts of things. But through the private sector, they have the ability to provide incentives. They have the opportunity to basically provide them other work opportunities to basically ensure that they're able to pay them even a full day's worth of work, whether it's the suggestion you made earlier with the schools or doing other work, that sort of thing. It's the benefit, and one of the key reasons why we moved to this structure is basically working to a private sector model where they have the ability to actually compensate the guards a lot more than theoretically we could. My apologies, I'll turn it over to Genevieve to respond to your other question.
Thank you. Again, through the chair. So we do have fixed rates for the contract, but because of this and because of the change in the unionization mid-process, we actually did inform all proponents of the status change, and so they were aware that this could potentially happen to their businesses. So they cannot translate any costs over to us. The cost would remain the same at this point, and they would have to absorb it if it so went that way.
How many crossing guards are there across Toronto right now?
800 and through the chair, there's 826 crossing guards right now.
I just never want to lose the human impact. There's 820 people sitting in this room with us, and we're talking about, their future. And, given some of the questions, and obviously people are trying to figure out what is the best way to land this, is there the opportunity to extend the current contract for half a year or one more year while we, figure out the details of what a transition can look like, so it's not as stabilizing as it currently, I think, is being experienced by the crossing guards?
That was your last question.
Okay, so through the chair, from the procurement view, not really, no. Again, we went out at this point in time because we were required to do so in accordance with the procurement bylaw, or the purchasing bylaw, as well as trade agreements that dictate that for this value of money, we need to be going out competitively. As noted, we did not terminate the contract. We did not decide to flip contracts haphazardly. It was a requirement for the municipality to go out to RFP and publicly bid. So at this point, we are out of extensions. We're out of timelines.
And if I could just add as well, based on following from that comment, that would mean a separate negotiation with the incumbent in order to enter into a new contract, and we would not be guaranteed a contract with them.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you, Councillor Cheng. We're on a second round. Anyone else? Councillor Perks?
Yeah. I want you to alert me if I cross into areas where we might have to go on camera. Councillor Holliday, in one of his questions, referred to the city as effectively economically managing this work. Is there an issue if, in terms of who the employer is, if we go down that path?
I'm not sure I fully understand your question, but I don't think there's a...
So I'll rephrase it then. So in Ontario labor law, there are all kinds of cases about governments and firms subcontracting and managing the work and effectively being found by the OLRB to be the employer even though they contract somebody else to do it.
So yes, in that context, there are many cases where contract owners are found to be employers. Obviously, that does come with additional liabilities and costs to any of the employers who are found to be the employers.
So if council wants to manage this work, set schedules, set working conditions, all of that kind of stuff, so that councillors like Councillor Holliday can be satisfied that we're in control, effectively, there's a line somewhere where we would become the employer.
Yes, that's absolutely correct, and obviously procurement model would not be the ideal way to do that. It would be to essentially employ those individuals directly under our employment policies and practices.
Okay, thank you. There was some talk about the Fair Wage Office, and I'm just going through the schedule of job classifications that fall under that, and I don't see crossing guard. Is this, can you explain that a little bit to me?
Through the chair, we're actually going to have Ali Sheikh, the manager of Fair Wage Office, answer.
So, through the chair, the question is...
So I'm just looking at the list of job classifications in the Fair Wage schedule, and I may be looking at the wrong one. I've got 19 to 22. I don't know if it's been updated. I see security guards, I see laborers, I see cleaners, but I don't see crossing guards in that schedule.
You are correct. It's not in the general schedule, and it hasn't been posted to the site. A bit of the history on this, when we were given this task of finding the rates back in 2019, we didn't have the time to put this into the general schedule, and we calculated what the fair wage rate would be at that time, provided it to be included in the contract at that time.
So we just did some work behind the curtain, did this.
Correct.
So we didn't have, at the time this contract was tendered, did the bidders have a fair wage schedule for crossing guards?
Yes, they did.
They did, okay. That just hasn't, our website hasn't caught up.
Our website hasn't had that included.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Parks. We're on a second round. Is there anyone else who would like to ask questions? If not, Councillor Holliday?
Thank you. Councillor Perks raised an important legal consideration, and that is when I think the case law was municipalities becoming very involved with their contractors, and I think the case law that I remember reading was a construction site. What provisions are built into the contract that we don't fall into that trap, that we start acting as the employer and getting quite detailed and involved in the conditions?
Through the...
I may defer to operational staff on some of those, but obviously our contracts are established in a way to make sure that all of our contractors are separate employers and that we don't inadvertently become that. We impose insurance provisions. We require the contractors to certify that they will, of course, comply with labor and employment law requirements and all other legal obligations that they have. And we also do not directly manage or supervise the employees in contracts, generally speaking, in order to avoid those legal presumptions that may occur when a contract owner becomes too involved in directing the work of workers on site.
Does transportation staff go to the crosswalks and pull the truck over and tell the crossing guard, you need to do this, 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 and this, or do they work through a different process?
Through the chair, definitely not. That being said, as we manage with any contract, there's periodic spot checks that are done. So we would do periodic audits to ensure that, as per the fair wage schedule, staff are being paid appropriately. We will invariantly conduct random spot checks on site. Oftentimes, again, not communicating with a guard or anything, but we will, observe what's happening at the location and then report that back to the vendor if we see any nonconformities with the contract or any health and safety issues.
So we don't have time to go through it today, and we probably shouldn't in this particular place, but your nRFP, I would imagine, has a number of robust requirements about what it is you're looking for in the service, but at the same time, each of the companies have the flexibility to figure out those working conditions, figure out the rules, and figure out how they're going to meet the requirements. And I take it, because you're recommending these companies, they meet those check boxes.
Through the chair, that's absolutely correct. We have a very rigorous process of looking to make sure that they adhere to all the requirements and standards, and likewise, we consult with legal procurements to go to the greatest extent we could possible to really try to protect the guards, both in terms of wages and also safe working conditions.
Can you just confirm to me the origin of all of this? If I recall, is the Transformational Task Force report that went to council in 2017. And from that, I think council told you to outsource crossing guards. That's the starting point, is it not?
Through the chair, so yes, we did get direction to take the program over from the police in the same way that our friends at Parks, Forestry, and Recreation were directed to take the lifeguard program over. We brought a proposal to outsource so that we could have some more control, as Roger mentioned, over what the outcomes would be for guards, that we could have them make a living wage, that we could improve the conditions, and that we could also be able to hire a significant number of people in a very short amount of time, and all the other components that come with delivering a program of this magnitude.
And it went back to council in 2019, and now it's back here in 2023 because it's another set of contracts, right? Periods of time.
That's correct.
Are there issues finding people to fill positions?
Through the chair, absolutely. We have challenges and vacancies in many of our frontline staff positions.
Do you think, and it's up to the risk to be managed in the RFP, but if a new company is won and they don't have 300, 400 crossing guards on their existing roster of staff, that they're going to have to get out there and hire?
So certainly I'm not speaking on behalf of any of the companies, but just my observation is that the crossing guards, as Councillor Chang pointed out, as the deputants pointed out, are a critical piece of the cultural fabric of their communities. They're known to the people that work there. There's huge value in having guards stay in the places that they've been in. Roger mentioned that there are provisions in the contract that ensure people stay close to where they live so that they're part of that community. And that's our expectation.
So although the crossing guard force has grown over time, would you say that observation is fairly consistent with the practice? It started with the police, and then we've had some iterations of contracts, but ultimately it seemed to be the same people, maybe with a different badge from a different company, but it was the same people there at the end of the day.
Generally speaking, I mean, I'm not going to say 100%, because certainly there's been changes and modifications with the ability to make a living wage. There's been more people who have joined, et cetera. So certainly.
Last question, and I don't want to get into a place that would get us in camera, but fair and ethical business dealings was some words that were brought up before, but do we have some principles in our policies and our approach to procurement that, we're at this juncture that we've been working now with 4 companies. We, city procurement, have been working with 4 companies. And should we not move ahead with the contract? Do you think that exposes us to some criticism? I don't want to say legal exposure because I don't want to get in trouble, but do you think we would be criticized if we did all this and at the last minute we just decided not to do it, reputationally?
Through the chair, so I will just say that our crossing guard program is critical and important to Vision Zero, to the safety of not just school children, but to people who cross the street in their community during school hours. One of the challenges that we had when the previous program before we contracted it out is we had a significant amount of vacancies because it was challenging to get people to come to shifts, given that they weren't necessarily getting paid for more than the 1 hour a couple times a day that they were working there. We have changed that program to have between 97 and 100% filled crossing guard positions every single day that there's a school day. And that, I think, people in the community would be very concerned about if we were not able to deliver that service when school started in September.
And I would just add as well that our purchasing bylaw and policies represent a fairness and a transparent process for any of the proponents who participate in the purchasing process, and also are in compliance with our legal obligations under international trade treaties as well.
Thank you, Councillor Holliday. I have a couple of questions for staff. So I'm looking at the Fairness Monitor report, which is actually quite detailed, 9 pages long. Is this pretty standard for every procurement, or is this more detailed than normal?
Through the chair. So Typically, a fairness monitor is only used in complex procurements where we want to ensure that from the public eye, we are asserting the fact that we are a fair, transparent, and open government. From the detailed perspective, this is actually fairly standard for a fairness monitor report to go through the detailed lengths. Naturally, if we had not followed proper principles and guidelines, that also would have been identified through this report.
So, in the report, there's a subheading called debriefing, and it says at the time of this report, no debriefings have been conducted related to this procurement. What is the debriefing in this process?
Through the chair. So the debriefings normally happen following award notifications, especially in this case. What happens is we walk a proponent through the evaluation process and how their bid fared in comparison to the requirements outlined in the nRFP. So the evaluation, how they can improve areas that they may have lost some points. That's what we go through, and we go through in detail on the entire evaluation.
So will these it seems that debriefings still have not taken place. Have they taken place? Or are they going to take place?
They have not yet taken place. They will be taking place.
Do you think they should take place before the item comes into the public domain and committee so that we can?
So it's a very delicate balance, since there is opportunity for also disclosure of information throughout this process, that should the bid be overturned, that we have to potentially go back out to market. So it's a bit delicate. It doesn't always happen before award. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. Timelines will also impact it. If there's a dispute, there's also a chance that it could be delayed just because we need to follow that process first. But we encourage the debriefing process prior to the dispute process. So it's a chicken and egg.
Understood. So just very, very quickly, we had this in the hands of police services. It had a number of challenges. I guess the earlier deputant wants it brought in again, but what were the lessons learned and the improvements made when transportation took it over and started implementing the program on an outsourced basis?
Yeah, through the chair, through you, Mr. Speaker. I think the key thing is just in terms of the oversight and making sure that all the crossing guards' needs in terms of health and safety, all those things are sort of protected through the vendors. Through the police program, oftentimes, depends on which division was basically managing in terms of what level of oversight they were able to provide. If it was a division where they had issues with resources, they couldn't pay the sort of attention that was really required to provide like proper oversight and support to the school crossing guard program. So a lot of those types of elements were baked into the RFPs, the negotiated RFP process, to basically request, and in fact, this is how we evaluated from one vendor to another, was to make sure that they had a very solid management team that was listening to issues and concerns from the crossing guards, and likewise, that these companies have a proven track record. We're able to check with other jurisdictions where they've done this type of service to ensure they have that sort of support with the crossing guards as well. All of that was kind of factored into the decision making to highlight and identify the top 4 that then went to the following stages of evaluation.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other comments? If not, we'll go to speakers. Speakers? Councillor Matlow?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have a motion to request the General Manager, Transportation Services to report to the Appropriate Committee in Q1 of 2024 on the feasibility of bringing crossing guard services under the purview of the City of Toronto at the end of this 2-year contract. My relationship with the crossing guards is both being a city councillor, but also being a parent. I love and appreciate what they do. They keep our kids safe, and they allow us to know that when I've got a daughter who currently I walk to school, well, not as much in the past few weeks, I admit, but I also know that within the next year or two, she's going to be walking on her own. So I'm reassured that there are trained professionals who care about our kids along with every resident of our communities who are there to keep them safe. And they do that often by putting themselves in very vulnerable positions. They don't know if that driver is going to stop. They don't know after inclement weather conditions if that driver can stop. But they put themselves in front of our kids and our fellow community members because they are professionals and they know they have a duty to protect and support our lives along with our kids. So, as a city councillor, I was very proud to name a playground actually in my former ward for Mona Piper. Some of you may know of her. She was Toronto's longest serving crossing guard for, I think it was like 43 years. Like she literally served generations of community members in the Maurice Cody Public School area at the corner of Foreman and Manor Road. And the reason that we honored her is because she was there for our community all those years. She was a member of our community and she deserved that recognition. But I see a problem in the relationship that we have with the crossing guards we have today. They're under contract with companies who we have no authority over. We have a contract with them, but we can't ensure that the people who serve our kids and serve our communities are going to have the wages that they deserve, the health and safety that we would expect for anyone we love, the ability to organize and unionize so that they can represent and stand up for themselves in a collective way, and ensure that, as Myra said very well, while they're supporting our kids, we need to be there for them. So the reason that I move this motion, while I acknowledge that we're in a situation today where if we don't support the recommendation, that there could be a period of time where we have no crossing guards working at all. I resent the fact that we're in this situation. I don't mean individually to any member of staff. I just resent the fact that we're in this situation because it's not an opportunity to really thoughtfully make a decision that will both support our kids and community at the same time support our workers. I don't like this. But there is a way to fix this, which is to have a direct relationship with the people who work for us. And that's why I would like to explore the feasibility of bringing this service in-house, and then we can have a relationship directly with the people who support our kids and communities to not bargain them out of a good deal, but lift them up so that they have the support that they need to do the good work, the courageous work that they do every day. And I obviously hope, and I have no doubt that my colleagues will support this request because I believe it's a value that we all share. And in the interim, without getting into the terms of the contract itself, I think that we need to explore even within this contract, directly with the employer, some more sureties for our crossing guards now to make sure that the fears and the concerns that they've raised with us aren't just sort of like, we trust that the company will be great or the companies will be great, but that we in any reasonable way intervene and advocate on their behalf to make sure that they live up to the expectations that we should have for them. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mallow, any questions for the mover? Councillor Perks?
Thank you. Yeah, as city staff explained, we're backed into a corner here. If we want crossing guard services, we actually just have to approve this contract, and that really upsets me, but you know, I have to do it. But the fact that we're in this box speaks to some really broken policies here at the City of Toronto. We're chasing a fantasy where we can rely on the private market to provide us with a stable workforce to do this service, which the General Manager of Transportation has described as a vital part of Vision Zero, of literally keeping children from being killed by cars on the City of Toronto streets. The fantasy has a number of dimensions. One is, we say, this is handled under the fair wage policy. Well, here's how the fair wage policy works. There is a field of work, we'll say electricians. And there are electricians providing services to private employers, to governments, and so on and so forth. Hundreds and hundreds of electrician contracts out there. So a wage is established through collective bargaining in the marketplace. That's not what happens here. This is a monopoly. There aren't many school systems in the city of Toronto, each independently providing crossing guard services. The private sector doesn't provide crossing guard services. There's one system of crossing guard services, so there's no wage established in the marketplace through collective bargaining. It's literally only this contract. So to say it's covered by fair wage just simply says the wages won't go down next time. It doesn't create what the ideological claim is that contracting this kind of labor out will somehow be affected by market forces. So we go to a second thing, which is to say, well, we will, because we knew when it was the police employing it, we couldn't fill the jobs, we'll start to establish some terms and conditions through the contracts. Well, we keep doing that, and what happens? We become the employer. And once we're the employer in law, we have to, we wind up effectively having to deal with the workforce directly ourselves. And I'll support Councillor Matlow's motion because that's the logical path we're on anyway. I will say that the one piece that mitigates that here is that the bidders were told it is going to be a requirement and we are going to watch it, that current employees will be getting, will have to be offered the jobs at the wages that we've established. That mitigates a bit, but we all know that workers having industrial democracy, the ability to bargain collectively, results in safer working conditions, which is literally what this is all about, safety of people on our streets. I can't fix it with this one contract, but I just wanted to put members of the committee and the public service on notice. My intention is to bring a letter to the next committee meeting saying that we have to start looking at things like successor rights in contracting out. We have to start looking at things like neutrality in union organizing drives. We have to look at things like what it says in the poverty reduction strategy, which is that we need to build a tendering process and an employment process that says that people who live in the city of Toronto or work in the city of Toronto can afford a decent life in the city of Toronto. We adopt these policy pieces knowing what it is to be a precarious low-wage worker in the city of Toronto, and then somehow we try to layer on that this fantasy that the marketplace will deliver those working conditions, and it clearly isn't. So we're going to have to review this in a much broader context as we look at, good jobs work, as we look at the poverty reduction strategy in future tendering. And, I am so sorry to the workers that we have struggled under 12 years of austerity governments to establish decent working conditions for the people who provide services that Torontonians rely on. But it's time to roll up our sleeves and start fixing that in a structural way.
Thank you, Councillor Parks. Councillor Cheng, I thought I saw your hand go up. I'm not. Yes? Okay. Councillor
Yes.
Cheng.
So I'm going to move my third motion that I gave to the clerks. I had a few other ones, but I too am in a painful position, and at some point I'd like to unpack how we got here. How is it that we always come to a point where we see the pain points of the people serving in our community. But this is a motion I want to move. I'd like to request staff to explore collaboration with schools on sharing staffing for crossing guards and recess and lunch monitors, and to report back to the General Government Committee by the second quarter of 2024. I think, you know, we're trying to build collaboration, but simply leaving it to free market and each of these contract holders to figure it out themselves. I don't think that's a way, because clearly there's a role for us to discuss a potential framework with the schools, and I think there would be both a cost savings potentially, but also really good full-time work for the people that are pillars in our community. And that is really the thing that I want to say the most, is that our crossing guards are pillars of our community. And there is a gentleman by the name of Scott, and he brightens my day almost every day when I pass him. He has the brightest smile for every single person. He dashes out to make sure that there's no person, no senior, no student, no parent would be on the road without his coverage. He's like nimble on his feet, but he's so enthusiastic. And I think he contributes something extra to our community that's not just safety, but that presence, that familiar, welcoming presence, which after COVID is so important. I really missed him during COVID, not seeing him on that street corner. And so I want to ensure that there is a smooth transition. I'm sad and frustrated that it doesn't appear there's a pathway to a plan B in this moment in time, because we certainly do want crossing guards ready to go. But we need to do transition better, and people who are precariously employed or employed in a low income range, when we're going to change things on them, it should be with utmost care, utmost transparency, so that they know the lay of the land, because we are impacting their livelihood. This isn't extra money for Starbucks that they might have. This is money that they need to survive in an expensive city. So I think we really need to pull back the lens and consider every change that we make that impacts the most vulnerable workers in our community, in our city, that change process would be done with thoughtfulness. So there's 826 crossing guards across Toronto today who are going to be asking themselves, what does this future look like? And I hope that we will ensure that the contracts that we have signed, that these employers will take the utmost care, that they will not be treated simply as numbers, anonymous cattle that we're just moving, but people, pillars of our community that we appreciate and want to continue to serve in our community. So I will appreciate that our staff would be part of that process and keep us posted on how it's going. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Yes, Councillor Cheng, I assume you're done. Yes, no, sorry,
Yes,
I got distracted. But I do have a question for you. Now, is it your intention that this could go straight to staff, or did you want this up at City Council?
Well, I'm struggling with that. I do have a motion drafted to report on a few things to go to council, but I feel like, time is of the essence. Transition is hard, and the more time we can give everyone to have clarity, because the longer we drag this out, the less clarity people will have for what their wall is going to look like. So that's where I've been wrestling, but I'm also looking at my colleagues, Councillor Matlow, Councillor Perks, and I think. Yeah,
all right. So okay.
Moving forward,
I got it. All right. So, Councillor Chang, with your permission, we're just gonna tinker with your motion slightly, and we're going to have staff report back to this committee. We won't send it up to. There we go. We won't send it up to council.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
Councillor Cheng, I appreciate the intention of the motion and the sentiments that you expressed. I guess my concern is what mechanism do you imagine could be used at the school board level for funding something like for the sharing of costs, I assume is what you're talking about?
Well, I think they're already paying for school monitors and recess monitors, lunch monitors, and actually they have a hard time staffing. I do hear, people who've said that some of the schools have been struggling with finding people. So here we have amazing community members who already have strong relationships in the community. And I think if there, obviously there would be an optional part of this, but if they had the opportunity to play a greater role and presence in the lives of the families that they're already familiar with, it would be a win-win.
So, sorry, can you confirm then that if I'm understanding you correctly, that the intention of your motion is actually for the City of Toronto to collaborate with the school board in order to recruit workers?
To create that full-time job, right? Because I don't even think right now our crossing guards are full-time. So to see, is there a way where if we collaborate on a model of employment that includes some work that's not just as a crossing guard?
Yeah, I appreciate the sentiment, but my concern when I'm asking you these questions is that we don't employ currently the crossing guards directly, and I'm just wondering, I don't understand how we could ensure, like, what entity would represent the workers or hold the interests of the workers in relation to scheduling. It just seems to me that this is not something that's workable, and I'm failing to understand in the practice how two different levels of government could work together to ensure that people are fully employed, and since these contracts are administered in different places. So I'm just wondering, Mr. Chair, like, is this in order, without dismissing the importance of the intent, which I fully support. I have concerns around the mechanics of this and the logistics of what we're asking staff to do here. Mr. Chair? Is this in order, Mr. Chair?
Well, my comment is twofold. Well, I'm sure it's well-intentioned, the likelihood of facilitating some kind of collaboration between our outsourced crossing guards and lunchroom supervisors within the school board. I think it's highly unlikely the school boards would consider that, or that it's even, or that we can even kind of go down that road with any kind of hopeful outcome. So it's technically in order. I don't know if it's supportable.
Well, I gave them, it's until second quarter of 2024, and it may seem impossible, but I always believe in collaboration. I think it's the best way to get the best outcome, and it's a conversation, right? I'm not saying that for sure this can happen, but we'll never know unless we explore it.
All right. So, okay. I don't want to get too dragged down in this. Councillor Matlow has questions for the mover.
Yeah. I have a question/favor of you, Councillor Cheng.
Sure.
So, my office explored this question with staff as well, and while I recognize that, of course, we would like to have other levels of government and other organizations pick up the bill for things that we're currently doing. So first of all, are you aware that, if my memory serves me correctly, the vast majority, if not like 90% of the school board's budget is tightly sweatered by the Ministry of Education. So they don't have a lot of flexibility under the existing framework along with the funding formula to really entertain kind of new big expenses such as this endeavor.
Well, they're already paying the people to be recess and lunch monitors. So it's not like this work and budget is not already happening. It's more, is there a collaborative model that would allow a continuity of presence, as well as an efficiency in terms of both financial and in terms of, recruiting and finding monitors, I heard has been at times challenging for schools. So
that's exactly, yeah.
There could
that's
be
part
an
of the concern.
opportunity. Yeah.
So the favor that I ask of you, instead of voting against this motion, would you consider withdrawing it? And then maybe a few of us could explore a way that we could find some consensus between now and council to arrive at a place that we feel like this is tenable and there's a way to sort of do it in a way that we all see some like a path forward together. Because you're hearing from your colleagues that there's this sort of like,
Yes.
concern about that. I know your intention is good. It's just that I think there's some work that we could do together on the motion. Would that be acceptable? to you?
Sure, I'm happy to withdraw it and work
Thank
with
you.
you and
Lily,
my
thank you.
colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so I need a motion so we're going to withdraw, Councillor Cheng, you're going to withdraw your motion. So you're moving to
Yes.
withdraw. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Councillor Matlow, based on your comments, currently it is not going to council. Nobody has moved this to send it to council.
Or any other opportunity to bring it back to committee. We just need to work
Okay,
together.
So it doesn't have to go to council unless you.
We can work on an opportunity to. Are you sure? By the way, this doesn't go to council.
No, we're directing to staff to come right back to committee, and it's procurement. So it's this procurement. These contracts do not go to council.
We could always bring a new business item to the next committee meeting, though, couldn't we?
We could certainly. The discussion can continue here.
Okay,
I
so
just
let's do
wanted to
that.
clarify that it won't be going to council.
Is that okay, Councillor Cheng? I'm
Okay.
seeing a nod. Yes.
So we were on speakers, and Councillor Cheng, I believe one of her two motions will come to a vote. And Councillor Bravo, I believe you were speaking next? No, she moved two, and I believe she would.
No, I only moved one. I didn't move the other one because that would bring this to council, and I think that the lag in time would be
Okay.
harmful. Not helpful. Yeah, thank you.
All right, so fair enough. Okay, so Councillor Bravo, it's your turn to speak.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to, through you, speak to the workers who came here today and to say that you can see how much we wrestled with this, how much time we spent talking to staff, talking to each other as colleagues. It's a difficult thing for a new councillor like myself to continually see, not just here, but in society in general, that the people who care for the most vulnerable are always in the worst situations as workers, whether it's seniors in long-term care, childcare workers, and yes, crossing guards, who I see are eyes and ears on the street, keeping kids safe while crossing the street, but so much more than that. You are a core component of making the city safer in general and more caring. And so it's very difficult to have to move ahead with this. I will be working with Councillor Perks on the elements that have to do with protecting the collective bargaining rights that you've won. And I know how hard that process is. I know how brave you had to be to form a union. And I think it has to be said that the best way to live the standard in any sector is for the workers to be able to belong to a union. And it's not just about you as workers. It's about every time you form a collective bargaining unit, you're influencing the entire sector and lifting the standards for other workers. And also this question about the formality of voice around health and safety conditions, because health and safety conditions for workers are health and safety conditions for everybody that is a user of that service, everybody that benefits from the service that you provide. So this is actually of paramount importance from a safety perspective, from a quality of service perspective. I will be supporting Councillor Matlow's motion because I do think that we have to explore the notion of how proximate this relationship is between the City of Toronto and the services that we provide, and how we can re-examine how we are, through contracting out, are disaffiliating ourselves from some of the conditions that workers are facing. I think that you can hear in general that in this committee we would want to be a good employer, and that ultimately the City of Toronto pays the price through the delivery of other services and through the provision of services that create other costs when we are not good employers. And I think that going forward, being a good job city, being a fair wage city is crucial to the health of everyone. And I think that we really need to figure out how to create an ecosystem in which it's easier through the support of the City of Toronto with whatever tools we have available to us, so that workers in the city who have any contracted or subcontracted relationship are more easily able to exercise one of the earliest human rights that was recognized internationally, which is the right to collectively bargain and by forming a union.
Thank you, Councillor Bravo. Any other speakers? Vice Chair Holliday is going to speak, and then I will.
Thank you, Chair. This is one of those debates, and we seem to keep having them at this committee, that are the most purely political and philosophical, and you just lay them out. And I think it's important to talk about it. I was concerned, one of my colleagues said, we're in a box. We have to do this. Yeah, I think there really is one practical solution to the vote today. This started in 2017 when Council adopted the Transformational Task Force recommendations to take the crossing guard program away from the police and outsource it. Vote's right here. I got it on my screen. And we voted again in 2019. That vote is all there. And here we are with a contract that, the 11th hour, some recommendations from staff. They've done exactly what we've asked them to do. Go out and find some service providers to fill these positions. And yet we're in the middle of this philosophical in-source, outsource again at this committee. But I suppose, I'm not surprised that QP came and they wanted to support their members. That's what they're there for. That's their job. I'm sure they're worried that that employer didn't win the next round of contract. I get it. And I'm sure it's stressful. You know why I know? Because some people have been going around telling the crossing guards to call a counselor and let them know they're really worried about their job. And absolutely, we took those calls and we listened to the people that were worried about that. Because that's part of this change process. What I am really worried about is the city's reputation to go out and run a public procurement process worth $167 million and then start second guessing it at the 11th hour. So that's why I don't think any of the suggestions to not adopt the contracts were practical or were overarchingly, the right thing to do. It just wouldn't be the right solution for council to do. But what I am really worried about is this notion that we would flip this program on its head and begin to insource it. So a few numbers that stand out to me. Back in 2017, when the program was transferred from the police to transportation services, the budget was about $8 million. It's now $32 million. That's this procurement. What's changed? I think there's probably a few more guards. I think I heard the number of 850, and if I recall, the report said it's going to go up to about 1,000. Well, there's about 1,000 schools in the city. So we're now reaching that point where, in theory, every school's got a guard. Now, I suspect some schools have more than one. But at what point do you say you've reached a practical limit? I mean, I guess you could put a crossing guard on every corner, but you need to have some degree and some sense about how big the program is. So if we think that suddenly, magically, it's suddenly going to become cheaper if we insource it, or easier to manage, or less risky, and we would have more control over it, I don't know about that. But what I do see are the practical things that we have to think about as a council. We have no money. We have no money. So to think that we're suddenly going to keep expanding this program and making it more costly and make it bigger all at once, it's an impossible proposition. So I'm quite satisfied to rely on a collection of companies that were screened and qualified by our staff. I'm quite satisfied to take their recommendation, because I think the crossing guards that are out there do a great job. They did a great job over the last number of years, and I hope they continue to do a great job over the years to come. But what I don't want to do is threaten the program, because we don't have the ability to continue to expand it and pay more and more and more into it. And if we keep changing the parameters and introduce risk into it, then that's ultimately what happens is, you won't hit the 1,000 mark. You'll never make it to that mark because the money will be tapped out. It just can't keep going on from 8 million to 32 million to 167 million. And so, I hope councillors pay really a close attention to this, but we also should be mindful of these big P policy discussions that we're having at this committee. Even though we talked about a whole bunch of technical things, the issue is very plain before us. And if we keep changing these big service delivery models, well, the implication is I wonder if we end up with less services at the end of the day.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Holyday. Anyone else to speak other than myself? The time is running late, so I won't take too long, and I don't have any motions, but I firstly want to publicly praise the crossing guards who are servicing the dozens or hundreds of schools across our city, keeping thousands of people safe every school day. I pass them on my route often, particularly when I'm walking to the subway. They're true professionals. They're always friendly, and they're very brave by being out there in freezing cold weather, in pouring rain, in some of the worst kind of job conditions you can imagine, with a lot of drivers not paying attention to what they're doing. And of course, kids are kids. You have to keep your eye on the drivers, you have to keep your eye on the kids, and all of this is done under very difficult circumstances, often with bad weather conditions. So I praise our crossing guards, and they're the ones keeping our kids and adults, keeping generally people safe at high-risk intersections. I also want to thank our professional public service. I am convinced, after looking at the Fairness Monitors report, the staff report in front of us, and the work that's gone into this, that they've done the best possible job that anyone can do, that any public entity, that any municipality could do in making the right choices of suppliers, of companies that will supply these crossing guards. And we all know that elected officials stay as far away from the procurement process as possible. It's something delegated off to the public service. They have to follow some very strict protocols in the companies that they pick. We are here to take a sober second look at the direction they're going on. But at the end of the day, elected officials have to stay as far away from that as possible. As far as moving it in-house, all I can say to that is we did have it in-house. We had, as been mentioned several times this morning, we had it run by police services. And I've got to tell you, and this is no offense to police services, I think they were glad to unload it. because it did not work well in-house. And that the solution that transportation came up with to use various third-party suppliers to help us pick experienced, responsible, reliable crossing guards turned out to be the best solution for the city. And we all know it's not cheap. It's very expensive. We know that they're following the fair wage policy, at least they're legally obligated to do so, as well as trade practices under provincial labor laws. So with that, I think it's time to adopt these recommendations. I don't believe it's necessary to use a lot of staff time in bringing it in-house. I'm not going to support that motion because we've tried that, we've been there, and it has not worked. But with the school year restarting in September, it's hard to believe, but we've got to get these suppliers, these vendors in place, make sure they have the teams available, and make sure our kids can go to school safely. And the best thing we can do at this committee is adopt the staff recommendations. Thank you. Sure. Okay, so Councillor Matlow has asked for a recorded vote on the motion on the screen. All those in favor, Councillor Matlow, Councillor Perks, Councillor Cheng, Councillor Bravo. Those against, Councillor Holliday and Councillor Pasternak. That carries. The item is amended. All those in favor? We don't need to record. No? All those in favor of the item is amended? Against? That carries. Thank you very much on that. Next item I have is 4.21. Councillor Cheng, you held this item down. Program registration, recreation facilities, space booking system. Councillor Cheng, questions for staff?
Yes. Yes. Thank you for our staff for working on this. I just, we had a great briefing yesterday, and I think a lot of people are excited and nervous about what this new landscape will be. As a mom registering for eFun, people have heard me call it the Hunger Games. And so what I would like to understand is, a new system people will be really grateful for, but will people understand the challenge of still having a huge a limit in terms of capacity in our parks and recreation program? So there will still be a wall that people will hit where they'll be on a waiting list or can't get in. And it's not because of the technical system, it's because we simply have not grown our programming with our population. And I guess my question is, when they navigate this system and hit those walls, which is very anxiety producing, which I can say as a mom, I have had heart palpitations at 6:30 a.m. in preparation for registration. Will it be clear to participants and registrants that when they're hitting that wall, that it's not a technical issue, but it's simply a capacity issue?
So through the chair to you, Councillor Cheng, great questions. A few things to keep in mind. The system itself, when implemented and when fully implemented, you can't hear? How about now?
I can.
Better? Yeah. Will provide some better program management tools in our community recreation area. Phase 2 of this will include a waitlist management approach, which will also help people manage and navigate through waitlists and hopefully bring people into programs quicker when those spaces become available. So I think that's a very positive thing. It will also give our staff in community recreation better program management tools to plan for programs, so that will be an advantage as well. The capacity issue around availability of certain programs is an ongoing program management piece that we are working, together through things like advancing the facilities master plan and additional facilities and expanding our availability of programs to try and meet that demand. And that will be going on for quite some time. So those two pieces coming together will hopefully alleviate. We do know that when people are using this system, the new system, when implemented, the actual navigation and planning tools for them are much more user intuitive and easier to manage. So the actual experience at that 7 a.m. time when you access the system will be a better experience. I cannot regretfully guarantee that everyone will get their first spot in whatever program they're looking for, but I am confident that the system will provide a better experience in how they're navigating the technology.
So in the previous iteration, I had a list of all the classes that I like my kids to go to with their codes. The code is the key thing. And if I hadn't looked prior to at 6:30 a.m., I was like, oh, I didn't look yet. I couldn't because the system was locked. I couldn't get into the system because they lock it. I don't know if it's 12 or 24 hours before registration. So, and then 7 a.m. comes, now I have to copy and paste all my codes in, try to get a spot. Anxiety is up here. It's very stressful. And in this current iteration, and I just want to confirm that this is the new process. So it's because moms around Toronto should take note here. So we can get into the system. There will be no lockdown. You can add all your dream classes into a wish list. And then the race at 7 a.m. will be simply pressing on your wish list to put it into the basket. And so that act of putting it into the basket, that's the competitive moment, whether you get in or you're waitlisted. And then, as soon as you put it into the inbox, into the basket, that's a confirmation that you have secured a spot. But there's still a race to get into that window where you can get into the that transfer, and then you can then check out and pay. Is that the new
Through the chair to you, Councillor Chang, you have a very good understanding both of the existing system and the system that is being proposed. What you're outlining, and I think appreciative because thankfully the session that staff had with you, I think yesterday, has provided you a good overview of what the new program is. But I think people using the system, to your point, will now be able to have something like a wish list where the existing system is a written sort of list of the codes, and through our consultation with community, we definitely heard major frustrations about that approach as well. The new system does allow, as I mentioned earlier, better navigation of the site and better tools for parents and caregivers and individually to actually access the program at that crush 7 a.m. registration time. I should note that we always talk about the 7 a.m. registration time, but we also have a lot of registration that just comes in naturally after that deadline has come, and so it provides great tools to both sides of that program registration piece when it's implemented. And I think the community consultation that we've done indicates that the type of wish list that you just described and that we met with you about is something that will be very welcome from the users of the system.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Chang. Any other questions for staff? No? Speakers?
Want to speak on this?
Yeah, Supermom, and who after that? My kids call me Super Dad, but I don't know. Okay, Councillor Chang.
Yes, so I want to thank staff on embarking on this journey, and I wish us all luck as we transition into this new system. It is proven. It's been used in many municipalities around the world, and so I'm excited unfortunately, because of the capacity challenges, I think we will still have moms with heart palpitations at 7 a.m. because we're just competing for so few spots available. So we do look forward to increasing capacity across the city. That is, part of growing our city. So when we say housing, 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 we want more housing. We also need funding for community center spaces and programs so that grows with our population. And what I would like to see in future, with regard to the system is how the welcome policy, and I have spoken to staff about this, welcome policy is our program that provides funding for low-income families to be able to access programs for free. And currently the technology of this new system and the welcome policy that is layered and nuanced, it doesn't fit directly. So I would like the two departments of welcome policy and this technology implementation to work together to find the best implementation, because one of the challenges for a lot of the low-income families are single parent families who have very limited time to navigate a complex technical universe. So if we can simplify how welcome policy is integrated into our technical system and make it more accessible, that will make our welcome policy more accessible, and more children and youth coming in, from our low income and vulnerable communities will be able to access these programs. So I look forward to working with staff as well as hearing how those two pieces can be brought into alignment, because that is probably one of the most important things. And also just, again, hoping that we can continue to find ways to invest in the growth of our community programs. Our Parks, Recreation, and Forestry Department is a fundamental part of our city, and so we should fund these things well with the growth of our population, so that at 7 a.m., I don't know, hundreds of moms are not fighting for simply 12 soccer spaces in the neighborhood. It's really, really frustrating to be waitlisted at 7:02, and that has happened to me before. And I don't imagine that this system is going to prevent that, because it's about capacity. So I hope that we make it clear when people are registering in this new system that when they hit that wall, it's not because of technology, but we have to advocate for that funding in a very difficult fiscal time. So thank you. Really excited for the new e-fund, which I hope will actually be fun.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Chang. I'm sure it will be. Any other speakers on the item? Councillor Perks?
Just very quickly, I wanted to congratulate city staff on once again very thoroughly applying the digital purchasing rules, like storing data in Canada. I always check for that, so good job there. But just to take a moment and step back and listen to what Councillor Chang was talking about, which is that our booking system at the moment of booking causes grief all over the place. But to think about what the cause of that is. It is not the software that causes the heart palpitations. It's the scarcity of service that causes the heart palpitations. And as long as we continue down this road of austerity, and the general manager of Parks, Forest, Recreation and I can think back to our very many budget discussions over the years and how it's always PF&R that has to come in at zero. Always. Every year we cut the amount of service available to Torontonians. No wonder people get upset when they're trying to get their kids into a scarce number of programs. We don't provide enough service so that, people like the vice chair of this committee can go and tell their constituents that I, kept your taxes low again. Well, yeah, you did. And you imposed a lot of pain, grief, and anxiety on Torontonians who are simply trying to find their kids a way to grow, play, and experience the city in the best way possible. And I hope we one day get to a city where investing in public programs that allow kids the best experience of the city of Toronto possible becomes a priority.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Parks. Councillor
Councillor
Bravo.
Parks, there you go. Okay.
Councillor Bravo, please.
I just wanted to add to what Councillor Chang and Councillor Perks said about the worry, the anxiety that it causes to be left out, and that anxiety and that worry and that competition is not experienced equally by everyone in the City of Toronto. People who can afford to have multiple devices going in the past have been able to jump to the front of the queue because you're allowed to put yourself in the queue in a number of ways. And then, of course, we have the challenge that a growing number of people just cannot afford internet access in the City of Toronto, nor do they have a smartphone. So there's really important progress that's been made here to make this more accessible, to make this work better, to function better. I really look forward to the day that one person, one vote policy is in place in terms of trying to access these services so that their beneficiaries are not always the people who least need this support, but the people who most need it. And I think that should be a guiding principle of everything that we do to reduce inequality, to make sure that we're bringing people up who are at the bottom of the income scale and have the fewest opportunities. And I think that this coming out from the 90s in terms of how we're building the system into the 21st century is creating the conditions where we might get there.
Thank you, Councillor Bravo. Any other speakers on the item? Councillor Cheng, would you like to move staff recommendations?
I'd like to move staff recommendations.
Okay, staff recommendations moved on the provision of program registration and recreation facilities space booking system. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. I understand, Councillor Perks, for item 24, you have a quick release.
I can just ask staff one question and then let it go.
All right, if it's the will of committee, we'll vary procedure just slightly so we can finish this item.
Yeah, just very quickly, I see, I don't know who I'm talking to. I see in the report that this says that you're adding an extra year potentially to the delivery of this. This is the retaining wall. And originally you'd hoped to have it done by December, but the report says it may be December 24th. Did I understand that right? Yeah? Oh, no. Life is hateful because without Lily, okay. Oh, there she's back.
Through the chair, my apologies, Councillor.
Do you want me to just keep going, Mr. Chair?
Yes,
Yeah?
continue on.
So I read in the report that although the original goal was to get it done by December 23rd, you're saying there's a possibility it might be the December 24th. Is that, did I get that right?
Through the chair, that is correct, Councillor.
Okay. Can I just ask you two favors? One, you try to get it done fast, because this has taken years and years, and the public is just fed up.
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Perks, we'll work with Transportation Services as they're the division of record that will actually manage the construction. So we'll speak to Barbara Gray and team to see what they can do to expedite the procurement of the construction to try to get it done as fast as possible.
Okay, and we'll keep in touch about that. And can I ask also that you work with transportation staff to make sure this is communicated in the local neighborhood, where we are, keeping them up to date, because, you know, people have been walking along with this wall about to collapse onto the sidewalk for years and years and years and years.
Through you, Mr. Chair, again, we'll speak to Barbara and team to make sure that they have a communication out as to what their timeline is with respect to both procurement and construction, so that those 5 residents understand what the timing of the project
It's not just the 5 residents, it's everybody on the street who walk their kids to school, for example. I mean, a crossing guard couldn't even help here.
No, I understood. I understand those barriers are an issue.
All right, thank you. I can move the report.
Okay, so we have to go to speakers to get someone to move it. We're on speakers now. Councillor Perks is moving the report unless there's any other speakers on the item. No? Okay. Councillor Perks is moving the item. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Now, we are actually closing in on lunchtime. What is the will of committee? To take a full lunch hour or cut it in half or work through?
I mean, I'll do whatever the committee needs to do. I know we're tight for attendance. I do have a 1 o'clock. I can push it if I have to. So why don't we just keep working and try to get done by 1?
That's fine. Councillor Cheng, are you okay with that? We'll just continue on and try and finish the agenda by 1. Yeah, okay. Yes, I think that's a yes. I don't know.
So moved.
Okay, so moved. Okay.
I think there's an issue.
Yeah.
Could you just wait 1 second?
Councillor Cheng, can you hear us? I'm not sure if that was a nod, but she would have been outvoted if she was against it anyway. Yeah, I don't know if she can hear us.
Can we confirm if she can hear us?
Councillor Cheng, can you hear us? Councillor Cheng, can you hear us?
I'm back. I went to another planet for a few minutes there.
Okay, good. Good to see you. Councillor, okay, so we need a motion to continue to 1, and if we don't finish, we'll revisit that. Okay, all those in favor?
I'll move it. Yeah, okay.
Opposed? That is carried. Councillor Bravo, I understand you have a quick release when it comes to the facilities management custodial services, and you have a motion?
Yes, I've advanced circulated a motion. It's available on CMP, and it's requesting more information for the July 10th meeting of general government. Essentially, the number of cleaners who have had their full-time hours restored, and B, any further plans to restore the full-time cleaner component to the 2012 level of 120. So it's just a request for information.
Okay, Councillor Holyday has questions of the mover.
Through you to Councillor Bravo, is it your intent that City Council ask these questions? Is this, I know we've talked about it at committee before. These seem like straightforward data asks, so if it's asked at the committee, it comes back to the committee. Otherwise, this goes to council and we might have another council debate. I'm just mindful of council's time.
Well, it's of significant importance to many of us, so I don't, I think that the question about you saw from the presence of a number of councillors outside of the committee who came to ask questions and to speak on this item when it first came up. This is an exploration for more information, and I believe that this is the way it has to go. I did initially request for it to stay in committee, but it has to go to council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Holyday and Bravo. Any other questions to the mover? Any other speakers on the item? No, we can put it to a vote. All those in favor of the motion? Opposed? The item is amended. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. So we can go back to item 22. And we do have a speaker on the item, Nadia Juveria. Nadia Juveria. Oh. Sorry, the name is Javera. So we don't have this person either online or in the room? All right, are there any questions for staff on its construction management agreement with Toronto Community Housing and the transfer of funds for the construction of St. Jamestown Open Space and Public Realm? Are there any questions for staff? Are there any speakers? Well, I need a speaker to move the item. Councillor Perks is moving the item. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Item 26, Modern TO, 610 Bay Street, 130 Elizabeth Street. Results of request for expression of interest. Councillor Cheng, you held the item.
Yes, I just have a few questions for staff.
Okay, questions for staff?
Thank you, through the chair. I'm just wondering, when was the scope of this RFP put out? That includes the paramedic hub, the employment opportunities, biomedical uses, while keeping the Heritage Bus Terminal. What was the timeline of this?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's Vic Gupta, CEO of Cratio. Councillor, we brought, so this particular site is one of 8 sites that has been declared surplus through the Modern TO program. The Modern TO program itself was adopted by council, 3 or 4 years ago, I think in 2019 or 2020, the exact date I don't have in front of me. But we took, at that time, these sites, council directed us to basically come up with strategies for each of these sites on what the future use would be, with a view to maximizing city building value and also following through on the direction of council to support the strategic investment policy, which requires us to try to monetize these sites for at least 20% of the value to be included back in the land acquisition reserve fund. So on November 24th, 2022, we brought forward a recommendation on this site to do a 2-part RFP process, a 2-part procurement. The first was a request for expression of interest, which is what is the conclusions of that is what's in front of you today.
So, is this mostly developers that are coming? Are we selling the land, or are they building and then, I guess, leasing the land from us? Is this a sale or a lease?
Well, that will be determined through the market offering process, Councillor, through you, Mr. Chair. That has not been determined. So the primary lead of each of the groups has been a developer-led process. There were 16 bids that were put forward. They're very comprehensive, so they've partnered in many cases with not-for-profits, with some of the folks in the Discovery District on Hospital Row, and environmental organizations, Indigenous organizations, and so forth. So it's a very robust team that most developers have put together with a view to satisfying the requirements of the REOI, which are outlined in the report.
So is there, as you know, there's currently a safe injection site at Yonge and Dundas Square. We sold the building, and they've had a hard time. I heard there's a hard time finding a new location for that safe injection site. Is that under consideration for any of these modern TO projects, or are we looking to then rent or lease other land instead of using our own?
Well, we're working through you, Mr. Chair, Councillor, we're working very close with Toronto Public Health on a relocation of that SIS location. In fact, Public Health has, I think, made a tremendous announcement regarding partnering with the hospital community to locate in close proximity to the hospital sector. And there's a site that we're exploring closer to St. Mike's as a replacement location for that. And that work is continuing on, and we feel pretty close to having identified a site.
And did you know that Toronto Public Health is also working on a proposal for a crisis center that will alleviate some of the backlog in hospitals where people who have mental health and addiction challenges who are accompanied by paramedics or police could be handed over directly without having to be accompanied and some of our paramedics and police staff wait with people in emergency wards. So there's a crisis center proposal that's being put together, and they require 7,000 square feet. And this location is right in the heart of, hospitals being surrounding it. And I guess because it's fairly new, and this, RFP was put out a couple years ago when perhaps this was not on anyone's radar. Is there still possibility to update the scope to include something like a crisis center for this or any of the other modern TO locations that are being surplused?
I think that we can certainly, I'll answer your question by saying I'm not personally aware. I'm sure our team at CreateTO, our client and stakeholder team, has been in touch to understand those needs, and we'd certainly welcome the chance to work with the hospital community, the health sector, to understand that need and find a suitable site, whether it's one of the modern TO sites or other sites that might be underutilized within our inventory. There is quite a bit of city-owned land in and around the Hospital Row, just even on the west side of University. So I'm sure we could work collectively with them to identify, or at least go through the process of identifying potential sites that could support their need.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Chang. Are there any other questions for staff on this item? Any speakers? I will move. I will move the staff recommendations, and it does go up to council. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Just a clerical issue. We didn't adopt the minutes from the last meeting, so if I could have a motion to Councillor Holliday. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. So the next thing on my list is item 29, the Fair Wage Office 2022 Annual Report. And I do have a speaker on the item, Janet Dazinger. Great, thank you, Ms. Dazinger, for joining us. You have 5 minutes.
My name's Janet Dassinger. I am a senior research officer with the Canadian Union of Public Employees. You're getting your full complement of CUPE today in this meeting. But we did feel that we couldn't not speak on this very important issue. A lot of the points that I'm going to touch on very briefly have been raised by other councillors when we had the discussion about the crossing guards, but I really think this issue actually goes beyond the crossing guards, though certainly that example today gives a clear picture of why the fair wage policy needs to be amended. When one looks at the intent of the fair wage policy, it's practically impossible to believe that any elected official or any staff person in Toronto could be against unionization, including those that are directly employed by the city already, or those who are hired by suppliers providing contracts and services. And here's why. I know you probably all have the fair wage policy memorized, but for those of you who don't remember, the intention is to produce stable labor relations with minimal disruptions, compromise wage differentials between organized and unorganized labor, create a level playing field in competition for city work, set standards in the workplace that contractors must meet, protect the public and guard workers from exploitation, and enhance the reputation of the city for fair and ethical business dealings. And further to that, the policy advances the city's commitment to access, equity, and workers' rights by ensuring that workers on city contracts are paid a fair wage and not subject to harassment and discrimination. So I think today's example of the change in contracts, and I'm sorry, I'm going to use the term contract flipping because it is a well-known union avoidance tactic. You may not feel it's what was in operation here, but it is a well-known union avoidance tactic that is used, especially in the private sector. But it really shows us how changing contracts or flipping contracts cannot be addressed by the current fair wage policy. It's not currently designed to meet the goals that I have just enumerated. The crossing guards are one example, but there are many others. However, we do believe that a fair wage policy could be a powerful instrument in avoiding the type of example we heard about today. We completely agree with the recommendation to update the wage schedules for 2022, 2025, and report back to this committee by the end of 2023. The wages are completely out of date, and they should be based on a living wage rate. Many of the positions and occupations are at the bottom of the grid. The fair wage policy is not just a mechanism to regulate labor relations for workers who are short-term and temporary. Many contracts, like the ones that were discussed here today, are really tantamount to ongoing jobs, that are not going to be ending for the foreseeable future. Those are not short-term construction jobs hired through hiring with unionized trades workers hired through a hiring hall. So as such, the fair wage policy really has to recognize those different labor market dynamics. According to the Ontario Living Wage Network, when shelter, food, transportation, and other basic costs are calculated, the living wage in Toronto for 2023 is $23.15 an hour. So even when minimum wage is raised to $16.55 on October 1st, this is still $6.60 more than what is considered what is considered, a minimum. Crossing guards in the fair wage policy have their wages set at $17.32 an hour. The union agreement, which is a first collective agreement, has their wages set at $17.95 an hour. This does not represent the total amount of benefits, though, and the wage package that these workers were entitled to and what fought so hard to obtain. They have minimum hours of work specified, so the shifts that you're talking about and eliminating lunchtime shifts, there's so much more I could say about this tender that I won't. But there are minimum hours of work specified, there's paid leave provisions, there are seniority rights to make sure that people's seniority is protected, extensive health and safety provisions that go far beyond what is legislatively required, a duty to accommodate disabled employees, and benefits like vision and dental care. So it's not simply a matter of wages and saying, okay, well, we're going to put a fair wage in. These collective agreements have many, many provisions over and above what is contained in the simple wage package. Councillor Perks talked earlier about the inadequacy of the fair wage policy to set a market rate for Toronto crossing guards, and that is true. We wholly agree, because we don't have union density in Toronto crossing guards at this time. But I do want to say a little bit about the provincial standard that CUPE has achieved with crossing guards. So we have 6 collective agreements over and above the one with 5519, the ASP workers. And the wages range in those 6 agreements from $25.88 an hour to $18.83 an hour. And these are the result of mature collective agreements. We have bargained those wage improvements and those benefit improvements over a period of time. If we had had to negotiate first collective agreements every single time with these employers in St. Thomas and Oshawa, Temiskaming and North Middlesex, we would not have achieved these improvements for those crossing guards. So, and I just want to say too, if $20 per hour is the average for crossing guards across Ontario, surely it should be at least $23 an hour for crossing guards in the Greater Toronto Area. I do want to just reiterate too what Councillor Perks and others have said about the poverty wage reduction strategy. That too, if we want a city that is a leader in the collective pursuit of justice, fairness, and equity, renowned as a city where everyone has access to good jobs, adequate income, stable housing, and so on, then we really, unionization is the best mechanism. So the second thing, and I'll be quick on this, we also support the recommendations to finalize a written grievance handling procedure between purchasing and materials management and people and equity staff. We support the intent of this goal. We appreciate the investigations the policy has been responsible for. However, we do not believe this goes far enough in terms of what the fair wage policy could do to make procurement and purchasing a more equitable and fair process for workers who are involved. And I don't need to say too much more about that because the councillors did raise some of these points, but just very quickly to end, certainly establishing an inclusive and up-to-date living wage rate would eliminate the kind of underbidding that is based in low wages. That is the premise in construction and building trades unions. You remove wages from the competitive advantage, and so there is no pressure or compunction on the part of potential bidders to lower wage and benefit costs to provide a more competitive bid. The second is achieving a living wage is only part of a decent quality of life. So again, I'm just going to reiterate what I said in terms of a union being and a mature collective agreement, not a first collective agreement. A mature collective agreement is the way that people in the city of Toronto who work as crossing guards could actually afford to live in the city where they work and to be able to raise their families in dignity. So we've really believed that a couple of things. Certainly, if there are collective agreements in place, when contracts are changed, those collective agreements be respected. And then the other would be something Councillor Bravo talked about, which is card check neutrality, that in cases where contracts are awarded and workers do enter a unionizing drive, that there be no impediment to them joining a union, which is their democratic right to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the deputant? No? Okay, thank you very much. Questions for staff? Oh, Councillor Chang, technically you held the item.
Yes,
So
I have a couple questions.
Okay.
Yeah. So thank you. I got an email this morning about some of the questions that I'd asked, but and I see that 7 out of the, is it 8? Or sorry, I'm having trouble pulling it up, the email. How many out of the 230 job designations are below living wage?
Through the chair, there are 9 job classifications that are below the living wage.
And how many employees does that represent in those 9 classifications? Do we have a ballpark of how many people are employed in that designation?
Through the chair, no, we don't have that record.
Okay. And I know Councillor Holliday and I, when we were talking about this a few months ago and voting for the fair wage schedule, I think it's always important when we're voting for something that we know the financial implications. And is it possible to determine how much it costs us? And I'm not saying I'm against this expenditure, but I think it's important to know how much do we spend in order to keep up with the fair wage policy. So from year to year, is there data around that is available?
Through the chair, the city's fair wage office is responsible for setting the rates, investigating. Unfortunately, we don't have estimators when it comes to what it costs with regards to labor. And I think that it might, not to give the suggestion, but it might actually help if the divisions would help, have that costed out. But we certainly don't have the bandwidth or the visibility into what the fair wage costs.
Because we are, at a time when our purse strings are getting tighter, and so I think it's really important every time we vote on something, we know what the financial implications are. So in principle, I agree with fair wages, but I would like to know what that means for our budget. That every year over year, as we're trying to maintain that fair wage, what is that cost? And the other thing that I am concerned about is the people who are not making a living wage. So do we have any legislation or bylaws that protect people who work for the City of Toronto to be able to make a living wage?
Through the chair, no, we don't have a bylaw that speaks to the living wage.
And are there any cities that include living wage in their fair wage policies? How do these two intersect?
Through the chair, we're aware of 2 cities that are employing the living wage. One is Nova Scotia. I have limited information about that. However, Vancouver, which for the last 5 years did have a living wage standard, just dismantled it and has gone to a fair wage standard. Although their fair wage is a different fair wage than ours, they're using a 5-year moving average of the living wage to set their fair wage. However, again, it brings to light that those are the 2 examples. So that's all I got to say about that.
Is there a version of this policy that could blend in a component where we just ensure that nobody is making below living wage in our fair wage policy? Would that be hard to do? And would we be able to calculate the cost of what that would be?
Through the chair, I just wanted to respond that the intent of the policy, as our colleague from CUPE has mentioned, was, it's made clear the direction that the office has to take when setting wages using union wages and market rates, and the living wage isn't stated there. And it really is what council would decide that should happen with the fair wage policy.
Can I just, through the chair, just to add on to that, again, I think we're all very familiar with the fact that the concept of a living wage and a fair wage are 2 very different concepts. Does a bylaw that represents living wage. Is that a possibility? Of course it's a possibility. But this would have to be a direction that does come from council, since that would be a very costly endeavor, potentially, and would require just us to do some financial analysis to see how it does impact the bottom line for the city at this point. Again, not out of the realm of possibilities, but it is an option, I guess. Just also a bit on a last note that you'd asked previously on what does it cost the city. We actually have a report from the 2019 Executive Committee where it was stated that the city stood to save between 2% and 8% on construction costs if they chose to cease becoming a construction employer, which is basically, again, following the basis of the union agreements, which would later relate to our fair wage calculations. So again, it's not an exact number, and it's more of an extrapolation of data.
All right, okay.
So that's, sorry, so that's a 2 to...
You're
Sorry,
done, right?
can I finish? Oh, I thought I saw
these
the
are,
minute.
I don't know, are these turning into more musings than questions of staff?
Oh, no,
Okay,
so
let's,
2 to
okay.
8%.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so she said 2 to 8% for the construction that would have saved us. So I guess, is it possible then, because that's just one out of the 230 categories, is that correct?
Technically, that would represent multiple categories within our schedules.
Okay, thank you. That's my last.
Great, thank you, Councillor Chang. And I think I had Councillor Perks next.
Yeah, Councillor Chang has opened a line of inquiry that I think we need to explore a little further. We have good advice from the medical officer of health and others that there are health costs and broader social costs which are borne by governments when people are in precarious working conditions. Is that a conclusion you share?
That's not a statement I disagree with, through the chair. That's not a statement I disagree with, of course.
And so when people are in poor health or suffering some of the other consequences of precarious and uncertain work, there are a variety of public services that have to step in. Housing services, right?
Yep.
That being one. And we've had report after report after report that when people can't afford housing in the City of Toronto, that there are knock-on costs to public services. Is that correct?
That is accurate.
Did the 2019 report that you referenced include a calculation of those broader public service costs that result when people don't get paid fair wages?
Through the chair, unfortunately, I would not have that information, and I'd have to rely on.
Sure. Through the chair, I don't believe that report actually spoke to that.
No, it didn't.
It was with regards to
Yeah.
Bill 66.
Yeah, so effectively, what the number that's being bandied about in that report and by some candidates who are likely not going to be very successful for mayor are using doesn't look at the fact that actually the broader public sector would wind up with much greater costs that we would have to bear.
Through the chair, that's probably a reality, correct?
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes. And if I may, through the chair again, just to be clear again, from the Fair Wage Office perspective, we are fully supportive of supporting contractors and ensuring that they have what they need access to. And again, that we are not making money off their backs, if you will.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Perks. Any other questions for staff? Councillor Holiday?
They're technical questions. Is there anything which requires us to adopt the fair wage policies?
Through the chair, the bylaw is the only thing that I can point to that says that we must follow a fair wage policy.
In other words, it's council's choice.
That is correct, through the chair.
Okay. And to put it in the simplest sense so that I break it down, the fair wage policy requires anyone that does business with the city to pay their workers the scheduled rates. And the scheduled rates empirically are supposed to reflect the rates paid to organized labor. Is that a fair understanding?
That is correct.
Okay. And so in theory, a contractor might actually have to increase the price that they bid to the city to comply with the policy.
That would also be correct.
Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. Where are you going? Okay, so speakers on the item? No? Councillor Cheng, you're going to move the item?
Yeah, I just want to speak briefly. Just really briefly, I would really like us to one day, I know not at this moment, consider how living wage is considered for people who work for Toronto. And I would also like to know, more fulsomely the financial implications of the fair wage policy so that when it's budget time, we know what we're paying for. So those are just my comments, and I will move staff recommendations.
Okay, yeah, all we're doing is moving receipt of this item.
Right.
So
Right.
all those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. That concludes our business for today. Thank you very much, clerks. Thank you very much, city staff, the public service. And thank you very much, committee members, members of council. Enjoy the rest of the day.